And here we go.
Are we live? Are we on here?
We be live, dude.
Doing this thing. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Live Fire Dispatches. If you happen to watch The Outpost last night and you're new here, drop a comment in the live chat. Let us know what you thought about it, what you thought about the story of Balan, about the entire series that we're doing out here. But if this is your first time, this is what you're going to get every single episode. You're going to get a former military cop and a Green Beret talking about this week's intel and geopolitics. We're going to round it out with our original segment called The Hearth. Going to discuss what's currently afflicting the West, cultural issues, the values and principles that we are all anchored to as Americans and Westerners. But we're Watchfire Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon. I'm a father, a husband, and a veteran, and we are here to be a bridge in the divide, your source for objective truth and educated opinion. As you can see, there's an unfamiliar face here tonight. We've got a doctor on to talk about some pretty interesting things when it comes to malaria. I think it's going to be a good conversation. As somebody who was deployed to an area that was rife with malaria and did not do the right thing, that's why Dr. Ross is here to talk about these things. So, but welcome in. I promise you're not wasting your time. Do us a favor, hit that follow button, give the video a thumbs up, and if you're feeling generous, please hit that repost because it really helps us out over here on Rumble. We're going to do a quick shout out to our sponsors. First, we've got Killcliff Energy. As I like to say, it's one of the best clean energy drinks out there. I absolutely love their CBD Orange Crush. It's one of the first things that I drink after a workout because I like the feeling I get afterwards, nice and relaxing. And they've got their new Bomb Pop flavor, which is really, really good. It's kind of a popular one out now for the summer as the summer kind of winds down. And then, of course, we got Red Pill Threads. You can go over there and get some merch for the podcast at redpillthreads.com/watchfire. As you guys can see, we got the new merch still up there. I still like the flock hunt, play on the old duck hunt thing. I think that's really cool. A lot of people like the Actanon Verba shirt over there. Got to send one of those out to Nick from Rumble. But if you like it, you like what you see, go over there and get some new stuff. It is updated from the old name. And now we got all that cool stuff over there. Yeah. So, but I appreciate you guys that have gone over there and purchased things. Like I know there's many of you guys who probably like, damn it, I've got to go update all the merch I already spent money on. Well, don't feel pressured. If you want to, we appreciate it. I really like my Yuri Bezmenov shirt from Red Pill Threads anyway. And then my Bohemian Grove one I think is pretty cool. But so I appreciate Dr. Ross Boyce, I appreciate you coming on the show to talk to us tonight. I want to give you the opportunity. You are a veteran as well, the U.S. Army. I want to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself to our audience, and then we'll jump right into the conversation, man. I appreciate you staying up late out there in North Carolina to have a conversation with us at 10 p.m. So welcome on.
No, happy to talk about mosquitoes anytime, and thanks for having me. Just as background, so I am an associate professor of medicine. It's kind of a fancy name here at UNC Chapel Hill. Before I went down the path of med school, I was an infantry officer in the Army.
Oh, hell yeah.
I graduated from college in May of 2001 and showed up to Fort Benning in fall of 2001. World had changed quite a bit between that. My first duty station was in Korea, and then I spent 2 years in Iraq, one with a reconnaissance platoon. So then I decided that maybe I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life, so ended up going to med school.
It's quite a big jump, man. I got to admit, going from being infantry to a doctor is probably not a leap that a lot of grunts make, is it?
No, there's not a lot of us out there. I mean, I can remember back, when I was on the interview trail and kind of trying to make the case of like why I was going from a job where my job was to hurt people to another one where my job was to try to help people or save them. And I mean, there's a case to be made of how there's a lot of the same values between the two, but got a lot of questions when I was doing interviews.
That is super interesting because when I heard earlier that you were in the military prior, I just assumed that you were in the medical corps and did medicine in the Army and went, but yeah, I know you went from one end of the spectrum to the complete other, huh? That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I did. It informs a lot of what I do now still. And it was a tough time, but I think we all walk away from it with some important lessons.
As an Air Force guy, I got to say, you've taken all the power I have away from me. Because really the only thing I got is to say, well, I'm in the Air Force, I'm smarter than you, but I'm definitely not smarter than you because you're an MD. And so I've just lost the only thing I have to tease you Army guys about. But what made you want to get into this specific field of medicine here and the work that you've done out in Africa to try to solve this problem? we were joking earlier about my time in Africa and how I didn't do what I should have done. But you're out here trying to solve that problem and maybe not, make it such a hard requirement for guys like me to take medicine that makes them have to feel like they got to pee constantly.
I mean, when I came out and was finishing up med school, my whole path had been kind of like, I want to get to working with something like Doctors Without Borders. I want to be working in conflict zones. I want to put the lessons that I learned to use in sort of a different way. And one of the first places I went when I was still in training was I went to an area called Somaliland, which is part of Somalia that's not recognized as being independent. And everywhere I went there, I had to go escorted by a gun truck, basically. And I could never leave the walls of the hotel where I was staying. And it just felt like being back in Iraq. And I kind of realized that was not good for my mental health or what I wanted to be doing. Ended up going to Uganda. And when the first time I was there, I saw how much malaria there was. And I literally walked in and there's just kids everywhere, all over the floor. I mean, not even enough beds, and they're all got fevers. And I was like, this is it. This is my thing. And so that was really sort of a moment for me where I made that transition from what I wanted to do with my life.
Yeah. Can I ask you what happens to, I mean, seeing kids like that and that situation has to tug on anybody's heartstrings, I would imagine. But what is it that they go through that young? Does malaria affect kids differently than it would affect like a full grown adult? What's it like for you seeing kids like that? What are they going through?
Yeah, I mean, the stats are pretty staggering. So there's about 600,000 deaths a year from malaria, and almost all of them are kids under 5.
Hmm.
And part of the
Wow.
reason for that is, kids just don't have, well, one, they've never been exposed to it before. Like if you live
Mm,
in a place where there's malaria, if you survive that first 1 or 2 episodes, you build up some immunity. It's not perfect.
mm,
But when you're a little kid, you don't have any immunity and your little body just can't handle it. And so if it progresses, um, it moves pretty quickly. And so those kids go through, fever. And then as it spreads, it can block off blood to their brain. And eventually, they die, and they die pretty quickly.
yeah. No, that's terrible. Is there a malaria season in an area like Uganda, or is this basically a constant thing?
It really varies country to country. And so in
Mm,
some countries, it's year round. And that's just because of the weather. And in other
yeah,
places,
yeah.
like in the northern countries in Africa, kind of called the Sahel region, where you get like one rainy season, it's really oriented around that. And so it varies place to place. But when you think about countries that have a ton of malaria, you're talking about places like Nigeria,
Mhm.
Congo, Uganda, Kenya, these places where it's green
Mhm.
and lush and you have rainy seasons.
Yeah. Yeah, when I initially arrived to Kenya was right at the beginning of the rainy season, and I always tell this story that like for maybe the first week I was there wasn't a lot of rain, and then one night it just started raining really hardcore, and I remember some of the Kenyans that we worked with were like, it's going to come down tonight, like it's going to happen, and it did. And there's all these HESCOs all over the place. And obviously, if you don't know what a HESCO is, they're just filled with dirt. They're
Yeah.
basically just like makeshift walls. But it's like I said, they're filled with dirt. And then it rained for maybe 10 minutes. And I just remember these HESCOs coming alive and all of these bugs crawling out of these HESCOs. And I always liken it to that scene from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom where they're wandering through the back of the palace and they're walking over all those bugs. I mean, like literally the ground looked like it was crawling.
Yeah.
And I didn't really have any issues with mosquitoes up until that point. And then I saw them a lot more, and it was a constant thing. And I've got some videos of a couple of different lidals we had out there, and just the bugs around them are absolutely insane. And mosquitoes really are a problem, but I mean there are bugs out there that land on you, then excrete an acid essentially that'll give you a second-degree burn pretty much immediately, and you'll blister right away. So it's terrible. And but the good thing I think about what you're doing is that you have the ability by studying malaria and then what you're developing, that this has implications everywhere, all over the world. Here in the United States, obviously places like Africa, where maybe people and where they live, they're not as close to medicine, and then of course like first world medicine and things like that. So why don't you go ahead and explain exactly what it is you're doing that's different than anything that people have really heard about when it comes to trying to deal with the problem that is malaria? Because I think out here, at least in the United States, in the developed world, this isn't something you think about. It's a problem around the world, but don't really realize the scope of how much that problem really is.
Yeah, and I'll just start out by saying, we had our first malaria cases in the U.S. a couple years ago in decades,
Wow.
and some of that may be, travel, changing world, temperatures rising, who knows, right? But it's not quite as far away as it used to be, or maybe it used to seem. But
Sure.
that's not the same thing as what happens in a lot of these countries, right? And
Mm.
they're, a kid in some of these places where it's super high transmission. Uganda has some of the highest recorded sites. A kid can get malaria 3 to 5 times a year, right? And
Jeez.
that's
Holy cow.
that's and you just think
That's
about
terrible.
what is the burden of that? I mean, yeah, each time it's a little bit of the roll of the dice that they die, but even if you have to walk like where I work, in a very rural area of Uganda, it's very mountainous, and so
Mm.
it's often mom, kid has a seizure or really high fever in the middle of the night. She puts on her flip-flops, walks down the side of a mountain. Maybe it's raining, it's dark. It's not like there's lights or paved roads in these places to get just basic care to get some medicine in the kid. And if you have to do that, 3 to 5 times a year, that's not only just sort
Yeah.
of a stress on you and your body and your kid, but you know, who's taking care of the other kids in the house? How many time much are they missing school? I mean, it really has a big impact on sort of economics and productivity, uh,
Mm.
beyond even just, my kid might die, which I think is probably the thing that most people worry about.
Do you know
Certainly.
kind of overall what the child mortality rates in that Sahel, pardon my pronunciation, area is?
I don't know specific to that area. I mean, bottom line is most cases of malaria kids don't die from, right? So case fatality rate. So of the kids who get malaria, how many of them die? You're probably talking in their like 3 to 5% range. It's not
Mm,
huge.
Mm.
Um, and maybe that's even just among, I'm kind of pulling numbers out of a hat here, but that's even among those who are hospitalized.
mm,
So it's not a huge number. Most kids get better, right? If you can, that's the thing. Malaria is a totally preventable and treatable disease.
right.
If you can get anyone, kid or adult, to care in a timely way, they're not going to die from it. The problem is
Mhm.
when you can't, and that's where the biggest issues are.
Yeah. Well, I mean, malaria is something that I would say that you'd probably say is sort of a time sensitive thing for treatment, right? And so
Absolutely.
I think you have to factor that in as well, and the method that you're going through to try to solve this problem, and some of the studies that you have to do, because this isn't just something that you can go out there and then try to treat or try to implement a new tactic to fight this. Like, you have to have actual trials, you have to have groups of people willing to participate in this, and that's something too. I wonder if you get any hesitancy from people to participate in these trials. I'd be interested to know. But can you run through like the actual methods you're going through in these studies, and how long it's sort of taken you to get to where you're at, and what it is that you're proposing, and what you basically brought to some of these mother and child pairs that you were working with to try and remedy the issue?
Yeah. Yeah. So we started, I started working in Uganda around 2013, I think. So I've been working there for about 13 years now. And as I said, we initially started working in a more urban area, and then we started working in some of the more rural areas where I felt like it was a little bit easier to make a difference, and some of the challenges were different. And one of the things you learn over time is just how much sort of the logistical barrier, to put it that way, I guess, of getting a kid into treatment in a timely way is. And so one way to solve that is like, how do we get treatment closer to the kids?
Hmm.
Another way to solve that is to say, well, what if we can just keep the kids from getting bitten?
Hmm.
And that's
Hmm.
really prevention, right? Everyone talks about prevention. And so as I was kind of walking around and thinking about things, I thought, how can we keep the mosquitoes off these young kids? And I look around and all these moms are carrying their babies on their backs in these like little wraps, right? And
Mm.
we even carried our own kids and some stuff like that. There's fancier stuff in the US. They like strap them in and put them on your
Yeah.
back or on your front, but they just use a piece of cloth. And I thought back to when I was at Fort Polk in 2003, getting ready to go to Iraq for the first time, and they gave us these kits, and we had to soak our BDUs in permethrin
Permethrin.
before,
Hell
yeah,
yeah.
before we went. And being a typical soldier, we were all like, what is this like goop that they're putting our uniforms in? We had the long sticks. It's like a witch's brew. You're like stirring it around.
Right.
Um, but I thought back to that. I thought, well, what if we could treat these wraps that women carry their kids in with something
Mm.
like that to keep the mosquitoes off the kids? And so we pursued that. I went after a small grant. Whenever you have a new idea, you often kind of start small. It's just like being a small business owner. I think you go for something small, prove that it works, and that was like a
Right.
$30,000 grant, and we enrolled 50 women and babies, treated half of them, their wraps, and the other half we didn't treat, and then we just kind of followed.
Okay.
We weren't really working to see does it work that well because we didn't have enough people really, but we wanted
Okay.
to know like do the kids get rashes? Would the women accept it?
Yeah.
And that was like a 6-month study at total for everything. And so
Okay.
we did that, we published it, and then you take that and you apply for a bigger grant. Takes another year or two to get the grant. We got a grant from a foundation, about a $500,000 grant. And with that, we were able to enroll 200 women in each arm. So 200 women and kids got a treated wrap, and 200 women and kids kept an untreated wrap. We actually took the ones who weren't treated and just soaked it in water. So it looked like we were
Okay.
treating it. So they kind of a placebo effect there. And then we followed them along for 6 months. And the total study was about 3 years long to do that. And what
Okay.
it showed is that we reduced the number of cases of malaria among the kids by about 2/3 by doing that,
Oh, that's
which is
huge.
a pretty big number. And we reduced the number of kids hospitalized for malaria by about half as well. And
Wow.
so, that's the sort of thing like it's simple, right? It's not, I mean, this is me. I'm not the smartest guy in the room. Like, we took an idea
Hear
that
you.
we took something that already exists and just applied it to something that they use locally. And now, it's another step of, next trial, bigger trial, new countries, new places.
Mm.
Can we work with some of these companies that treat uniforms already, right? So
Mm.
now military uniforms aren't soaked. Like the soldier doesn't soak them. They come that way. They're treated in
Yeah.
the factory. And so, can we use that sort of technology? And so that's the stuff we're doing now. But that's kind of that's where we are, and that's where a lot of my work is right now.
It's such a shame just the way I know a little bit about the grant writing process, and then obviously the study that you had to set up in order to, proof concept and move forward. It's such a shame that, you had to set up your own control group and treated group
Mm.
in a situation where you're at when you're like, man, I wish I could just help as many women and kids as I can, and I have access to this. When you could use like the entire rest of the country as your control group, and you know what I mean? But it's like, I understand the constraints that you're under, and that kind of stuff, that bureaucracy, the red tape is always so frustrating to navigate. Because you would think something so simple as we already give it to the soldiers to keep bugs off of them. If you wrap a kid in it, ipso facto, right? But yeah, that's always so
I,
frustrating.
I mean, it's fair. I will also say like the government probably has a different risk tolerance for what they're willing to put a soldier in, an adult
Yeah, that's a
soldier,
good
than
point
what
Right.
too.
you might be able to or willing to put your 6-month-old in, especially when you're talking about chemicals. And
That's
so,
a good point.
Yeah.
I feel like it's safe. I wouldn't have gone forward with it if I didn't think it was safe. But we certainly want to make sure that we're making everyone, if my wife was, if I was going to put our kids in that, my wife would be like, "Are you sure this is safe?" And I'd be want to
Certainly.
be pretty damn sure before I did it. So,
Right.
that's kind of where we are, and I think it's fair. It's a balance. Everything is a balance, right? What's bad? A little chemical might be bad, but what's worse is getting malaria and kid dying
Right.
from it.
Yeah, that relative risk like
Yeah.
really drives the train on that one when you can show the numbers already, like based on what you were saying. It's like this kid has a 75% chance of contracting malaria, and if he does, like those are
Yeah.
already the figures you're dealing with. But
Yeah.
and I just pulled that number out of my hat, but
Well, you were saying that you had to take results back and basically show that you're having success and hoping that you're getting more grant money. How have you been able to scale this and take it other places? Just the efficacy of what you're doing. Obviously, you sort of proved that. Like by 66%, you're reducing this risk for these kids. I mean, that's an astounding number. Are there people who are like, hey, we really want to help you out. We really want to see if we can expand this. Whether it's around the African continent or it's other places around the world, wherever. How much success have you had with people trying to take this and scale it for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's that study was sort of a life-changing event for me as far as success rate goes. You know, there's always naysayers, but there's also people who really get it and want to accelerate it. And so we're dealing with both ends of that spectrum. And I want to
Mm,
be careful. I'm cautious on both ends, right? Like the naysayers, I'm like, come on, man, like we can do better than this. And those who want to roll it out, I'm like, I don't know, maybe we should do one more study, make sure we're confident it was just one place. And so, and that's partly because again, I don't want to roll something out that is my
mm.
name and
right.
and suddenly
Yeah, certainly.
something goes wrong that we didn't anticipate. And so it's a balance. I think we move now from focusing so much on like does it work in a trial where everything is very closely watched to like does it work as we start to roll it out into the communities and they use it the way they're going to use it, not when we're sort of like lurking over their shoulders keeping close tabs on everything. And so we're doing another trial. The NIH, believe it or not, has funded a trial in Uganda that we're going to do. We're going to follow the kids for 3 years, which is really awesome. We're
Wow.
really going to look at the impact over their entire lifespan of the RAPs.
Hmm.
Um, we got some funding to do this in refugee camps. So you can think
Okay.
about like, people coming from Congo fleeing violence. They move into a refugee camp. They don't have a house or a shelter. They can't use a bed net. Like perfect sort of opportunity to try something like this.
Mhm.
Hmm.
Uh, we want to explore it and we're having some luck exploring it in different countries where maybe the mosquitoes are a little bit different. It's not the exact same type of
Mm.
mosquito, or maybe where wrap use is a little different. So we're kind of exploring all these and doing a little bit of what I call franchising, where we're working with some partners so that we're not directly overseeing every study, but working with some teams in other places. So it's been really exciting. I mean, it's an exciting time for this sort of stuff. And to be honest with you, like we really need it. Like malaria's, we had made progress for 20 years and now it's kind of backsliding. It's not going as well as we would
Mm.
want sort of globally. Part of that is there's been more insect resistance to chemicals. And the other part is mosquitoes are probably biting outdoors. We used to always say like they bite at night, they come in your house, bite you when you're asleep. But they figured out if you have a net, like maybe I'll wait till you get up in the morning to go to the bathroom for the first time, or when you're
Mm.
hanging out or on the front porch with your friends, like maybe I'll bite you then. So they've changed their behaviors, and so we've got to tackle some of those
Interesting.
issues. Yeah.
Well, you just made me think. You were talking about obviously there's not all mosquitoes are the same. Does the treatment that you're applying to these wraps does it affect certain species of mosquitoes differently? Certain species of mosquitoes don't seem to be bothered by it, or maybe different strains of malaria and all these other like what are the other like factors when you're going into this that you have to consider, right?
Yeah. So even within the mosquitoes that transmit malaria, there's different subspecies of mosquitoes that
Mm.
have different behaviors and they breed in different places. One of the main things that we encounter is resistance. So permethrin's been around for decades, and
Okay.
mosquitoes have developed resistance to it. They don't get killed by
Interesting.
it, either at all or as quickly as it used to. One of the interesting things about permethrin, though, is that it also acts as a repellent. And so
Mhm.
probably 90% of the mosquitoes in our area of Uganda are resistant. They're not going to be killed when they
Oh,
land on
wow.
that wrap.
Wow.
But it's enough for them to be like, I'd rather go somewhere else. And that's all we want. Like, we
Sure.
just want it
The
not to land
deterrent.
on the kid. And I don't want to say it's like ideal if it then goes bites an adult nearby, but that's better than biting the kid who's more likely to die. And so,
Right.
um, that's one of the factors. But there's a lot of some mosquitoes like to breed in big pools, some breed in small little pools of water. And so, understanding how it works in those different contexts is going to be really important as this goes forward. It's true for anything related to malaria. It's not easy. Nature is smart, man.
Well, it sounds like you have to have a pretty wide swath of people involved in your operation, not just doctors, not just people, scientists out there observing these children and taking results. It sounds like you have to have like virologists and probably people that are good with mosquitoes and all this stuff. Like, who are some of the people that you have, for this 3-year now project that the NIH is funding that have to go into this? Like,
Bill
Yeah.
who are those
Gates.
Yeah.
folks?
I mean,
What?
I said Bill Gates.
Oh, yeah.
it's actually the best part of my job, right? Is that I
Mhm.
get to work with people who know a lot of stuff about things totally different than what I know about, right? And
Mhm.
so I work with what's called an entomologist, folks who study bugs,
Mhm.
mosquitoes. They're really important. I'm not a pediatrician. I'm an adult infectious disease doctor.
Right.
Um, so understanding pediatrics and how kids' bodies respond, epidemiologists, biostatisticians,
Wow.
laboratory types who do some of the testing in the lab when we have results and things like that.
Mhm.
But I mean that's team science, right? I mean it's the same thing in the military. Like everyone has a role, and you play your role, and you bring the expertise, that everybody has to bear on a problem. And so that's actually not a barrier. It's something that I really like.
Yeah.
We've had a kind of an interesting turn of events since 2020 here in the US, right? And I think a lot of people, as we came through the COVID, the pandemic, uh, really threw the baby out with the bathwater as far as trusting medical science, and I think that it's led to, which is really unfortunate. I was a Green Beret medic, so I spent time in the medical sciences, and it was super frustrating for me even dealing with teammates when they see what's going on over here with the mRNA technology and the COVID vaxes and that whole debacle, and then coming to the conclusion that basically now all medical science is bunk, right? And then throwing it all out, which is super unfortunate. And you were saying earlier, right, that we're seeing malaria for the first time in the United States now recently, and there's also been an uptick in measles, and the mumps are coming back in the U.S.
Yeah.
Polio, I believe, diseases that we had all but eradicated through vaccination
Yeah.
technology. Has that trajectory affected what you're doing at all in Uganda, or being over in Africa? Have you been kind of immune to that?
Good word.
Thank
Unintended.
you.
Yeah. I mean, I would say it's different there, and I think you had mentioned earlier about asking a little bit about, is it hard to get people to take part in some of our studies?
Right.
Mhm.
I do some work here mostly around ticks and Lyme disease.
Mm.
So that's another discussion for another day. But if we were to do a study here, we'd be happy if we got like 20% of people who were eligible to participate. That would be like killer.
Hmm.
There, we get 95%.
Wow. All
And
right.
so
Wow.
and I think that's partly because and we have to be careful of this, right? We don't want people just like signing up for a study because they come see a white guy show up and think they're going to get cured of something like that.
Right.
We have to be very careful and not to overinduce people. But at the same time, I think malaria is such a problem in these communities that
Mhm.
people and we've heard it from people over and over again, like, I want to do something if I can be a part of this study that helps generate information that helps other people in my community so the kids don't die, like sign me up.
Yeah.
And so I have a you know, I can get tearful thinking about like all the women who signed up for these studies and came forward and got extra blood draws and subjected their kids to some of this. I mean, we obviously try to minimize any harm and things like that, of course, but
Yeah.
it's still like, they're living on a couple bucks a month and taking time from work in their garden that feeds their family to come into our clinic and
Right.
make a contribution to advancing knowledge. So, I mean, it's inspiring. It's what keeps me going and really, it's very satisfying. It's like, wow, we're onto something here, that people are willing to do this. So yeah, we don't. I mean, some of there's different sort of conspiracy theories that exist. People are people, right? Everywhere. It's just not quite around the medical piece as much as it has been here, the last few years.
Yeah. One of the takeaways I got from my experience in Kenya was just an even more profound sense of how lucky we are here in the United States. And then, I was stationed in Germany when I got deployed to Africa. So, Germans, the West in general, just how fortunate we are in the lives we live. But like truly, it's guys like you that like most people just never hear about, that I would consider these unsung heroes of other people that we just never hear about. You learn about all these malaria or child mining, child labor, all these things that happen in Africa and some other crazy things around the world. And to hear somebody like you solving these problems, to me, like, I just think it's amazing that somebody even spends their time doing anything like this, let alone to know that you get the collaboration that you need to actually try to solve these problems. Probably has to give you a hefty amount of optimism to know that that's happening too, because then it gives you more opportunity to showcase what it is that you're doing, because you have a wider group of folks that you're trying to treat. And then you can come back and say, to whomever it is, the NIH or maybe a private donor or somebody who's looking to help you out, and say, look how willing these guys are to participate in this trial. That has to be a selling point for you too, isn't it?
No, it absolutely is. And I think, it's one of the reasons there's been some criticism within the NIH or of like, why do we do international work? And so,
Mm, mm,
part of it, there's a case to be made of like, well, malaria is actually really important to service members because we send people to places. You talk about like the Pacific campaign in World War II, like half
yeah.
of the Marines had malaria and were out of the fight. So that for those
Mhm.
reasons, it's really
The other
important.
half had dysentery.
Yeah, right.
um,
For real,
you
man.
can make a case that like we want to control malaria over there so it doesn't come here, right? That's a case.
Mm,
To me, I mean, like I said, I walked into some of those clinics and hospitals the first time, and that was the case, right? Now that I'm a parent too, like you just see the burden and the suffering, and so to me, that was the same reason I joined the military. Was when I was coming up, it was stopping genocide in the Balkans, right? And then I ended up going to
right.
Iraq, which was a very different sort of mission. But
Certainly.
um, the idea that the military was a force for good. I mean, I think a lot of what I do is sort of on the same stream. It's like I'm not in this to. I'm not going to make money selling treated baby wraps. That's not what I'm trying to do. I hope somebody
Mhm.
does. It'd be great if somebody picks it up. Um, but it's an important mission. It's just a different way of framing sort of mission and teamwork and those sorts of values. And so I think when we think about partnering and how we do that internationally, it's not just because it's good for us to keep it over there, but it's just, we're team members and we're collaborating on knowledge and working together. And I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious if, just kind of the cuts and stuff like that have happened to the government over the last few years, if any of that money has affected what it is that you guys are doing. I know the NIH, of course, has been one of those that's been hit by that. Has been it, but has it affected you and your work?
I mean, I'm very fortunate in that we kind of
Mm,
came along with this very successful project right at a time when all these cuts were happening. And so,
sure.
good science persists. You got a good result, no
That's
matter
good.
what the environment is, you're going to be okay. I've got colleagues who've been hit. I think from my
Mm,
end, a lot of the barriers have been put up to how we collaborate with international colleagues has been
mhm,
a hindrance. It hasn't stopped anything. It's just been more paperwork, if that, you know, you have
mm.
a sense of what that's like. There's just more
Certainly.
more, got to jump through more hoops to do the work that we were doing before, and so that's been
Mhm.
one of the biggest barriers to what we're doing.
Well, I will say this, man. I think the NIH, rightly so, has gotten a bad rap lately, and especially some of the stuff that's been in the press. But hearing about the grant and the work that they're doing with you, it's nice to hear about that grant money going to something worthwhile for a change. So that is encouraging for sure.
Well, and that you're
Yeah,
protected from it, sounds like, because of the good work you're actually doing.
Right.
yeah. I mean, every large organization could always do better, right? There's no doubt
Sure.
about
Certainly.
that. And so, again, I just feel lucky and fortunate that the timing that we've had this success. But what's the saying? But sort of by the grace of God, go I, or whatever
Right.
it is.
Yeah.
If that had not happened to us, I could have taken a lot of this. It could have been a lot harder.
Yeah. So, really, I think the last question I've got for you is really not even a question, but if you were explaining something to about what you do to the audience or anybody who's going to listen to this, that you want them to know about what you're doing and to take away from what it is you're doing, what is it that you would tell them?
Yeah, it's a great question. So buy a little time to stew on it. Um,
You're good.
I think it's easy to see. I mean, I'm an academic, right? My background is definitely different from some of my peers. Um, I don't think that changes the sort of drive and dedication to the work that we do. You wouldn't see any difference between me having come from the military, um, and a lot of the people that I work with, right?
Mm,
Most of my peers and sort of the academic world who are focused on these global health problems, especially in developing countries, are in it for legitimate good reasons and are trying to do like, you know, good work to reduce sort of suffering among people. I think there's a legitimate debate and discussion that anyone can have about how much of our money should be sent abroad for work like that. Um,
really.
but the people that I work with are salt of the earth people in the same way that I would say about people I serve the military with. It's not about self. It's service to mankind, and I think understanding and appreciating that. Um, you know, I think I see both sides of it, having sort of the career that I've had so far in my life.
It's no surprise that somebody like you mentioned before that when you were interviewing, I guess, for to get into your doctorate program, I guess, like why it is that somebody who was an infantry guy in the army would want to come into medicine. But when you talked about how some of these folks you work with that have had no military background, they're the same salt of the earth people that you're talking about in the military. Like to me, it's no surprise that somebody like you, or I know other veterans who've gone on to do things that have nothing to do with security forces or military policing or anything like that. And they're pretty astounding things, really, really smart folks. It just completely makes sense to me that you would want to do something like that. And I think that, another veteran, like me would get that because you're describing, service before self. You're describing trying to contribute to solving a problem, which are all things that not only are you like taught to do those things, or it's try to ingrain into you through like professional military education or doctrine or whatever like that. But if you're joining the military, I say you probably have a proclivity to want to do some of those things anyway, because you have to understand that when you're going into the military, the intent is that you're becoming part of something bigger than yourself. So it just seems like a natural fit for you to slide into something like this. And not that like, if you were just like a doctor you'd go to for general practitioner kind of thing, not that that isn't awesome, but like you're obviously taking on more onto your plate and casting a wider net of people and problems that you're trying to solve. So I think it just makes total sense that somebody like you would want to get into some of those things. And I appreciate you coming on and talking to us about it, Dr. Boyce. I would really love, for you to tell people where they can go to learn more about what you're doing, and then how it is they can help you continue to do what you're doing, aside from, getting the message out or anything like that.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate it. I'm glad that the passion that I have for this come across in a way that you clearly are able to get it, because what you just said rings very true. Um, you know, we are always looking for help. There's never enough money for anything, but just understanding why it's important, I think goes a really long way in supporting sort of the government efforts to do this. I think we have like a foundation set up at the university if anybody wanted to give, but I can share that link with you guys afterwards. But
Yeah.
I think really just understand this is a problem, and knowing that me and a lot of smarter people than me are out there working on it, and sort of having support for that is really great. And if any like move the needle from this at all, you know great time well spent, and I'm happy to have been here with you guys. And happy to come back and talk about Lyme disease or something else some other time.
Heck yeah.
No, I would definitely be interested in it. That's definitely something that we deal with here in the States quite a bit too. You know,
Yeah.
I was going to say that I would really like to talk to you again offline when the show's over, you know, reach out to you. I would love to collect some stats from you on what you're doing other than just some of the stuff that, like, you know, you'd shared with us before, because I'd like to make some social media posts about it too and get some of that out there, because that's going to get into a lot more eyeballs. It's going to go right into, you know, the algorithm on Instagram and Facebook and all that stuff. It would be really cool to put that out there too for people. This isn't exactly, you know, very broad style content. It's pretty niche, but it's very, very important. And I think a lot of niche things are very, very important. So I would love to hit you up on the side and then get some of that stuff so I can make a post and then kind of show you that stuff, and you can like kind of co-sign on it. Like, yeah, I'm happy with that. You know, that sells what's going on here. That's exactly what it is. The data is all correct, and put that stuff out there. So I will do that, because I would love to be able to, at the very least, put eyeballs in front of it so people know what you're doing. And I think it's cool, man. It's always the simple things that you're like, oh no shit, I should try doing something like this. And you're just out there, you observe this, you're like, you know, like behaviorally, how can I insert a solution into these people's lives? And you just witness what these guys do every single day. They don't think anything of it, you know, and it's just so commonplace. It's like, why would you look there for a solution? When you think about solving a complex problem, I think everybody sort of comes into it with thinking the solution is going to come from this like obscure corner of wherever, but you know, it's literally right in front of you, wrapped around these people's bodies. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, thanks. I think back, it reminds me of what an E7 told me when I was a brand new second lieutenant in Korea. And he leaned over to me and said, "Sir, don't ever tell a soldier how to do their job. Tell them what you want done." And it was amazing that if you tell them kind of the end state, like, this is what I want you to have done, and then you let them do it, how people figure stuff out, because they know more than, you know, I had a college education, great, but when it comes to like getting that Humvee stuck out of the mud, like that E4 is going to do a better job than me sitting there supervising them how to do it. And that's really what it's all about, is empowering people who are on the ground to understand the mission and what needs to be done. And so it feels like I gained a lot from being on the ground in Uganda and working with the folks that I work with. So
all I need is in-state and intent, sir. That's what I need.
That's right. Yeah. Oh man. Well, thank you so much, Doctor, for coming on and talking to us. I really appreciate it. I learned a lot from talking to you. I think it's really cool. I'd love for you to come back and talk about some of these other things, like you said, with Lyme disease or whatever, especially when it comes to, I don't remember what it's called, but the one where it makes you not want to eat meat. That one is really,
alpha-gal.
That's right. Yeah. Would love to hear more about that. But seriously, thank you for coming on. I hope you have a good night. Appreciate you staying up late for us all the way over there on the East Coast. And college football is coming back, man. I guess we'll see how your team and my team do. We'll have to see, you know.
I would bet on your team.
You think so? I don't know, man. But trust me, as far as I could throw one of those offensive linemen right now.
Yeah.
But, I hope you have a good night, man.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Have a good one.
Thanks, Doc.
You too, brother. Hell yeah, man. That was a really cool conversation. And I meant what I said sincerely, that people like him are doing this work that you wouldn't even think is going on around the world. Unsung hero certainly is the right way to describe it. And just one dude, man, out there doing it. And I do think it's cool that they're just wrapping these things or dunking these things and then putting them on the kids, because it's not something obscure. It's not weird. You know, it's not even that invasive. It's going to happen anyway. And the solution is inside something that happens naturally all the time. So
it's such a simple concept, right?
That's what I'm saying.
He's not trying to reinvent the wheel by any means. Yeah.
Yeah.
Super interesting.
Liberated asked if he was in the Air Force. No, actually, Dr. Boyce was in the Army. He went in 2001, basically right when 9/11 happened. He was an infantry officer, and he's a medical doctor now. So I was in the Air Force, though. Chris was in the Army as well. But anyway, I appreciate you guys hanging out and listening to that part of the conversation. I thought it was really cool to talk to him. Probably a good time to do a palate cleanser as well. And then we can jump right into some of the other things we're going to talk about, unless you got other things to bring up.
No, all I wanted to say is just thanks to Hot Seat Todd for raiding the stream and for everybody coming in and all the all of the usual scallywags are hanging out. So it's good to see all you guys tonight. And then we'll jump over here and we'll take a palate cleanse, dude.
Yeah, perfect. Colts Walker says he mentioned climate change. You know, I believe that the climate is changing. I just doubt the level that humanity is having an effect on it. So
Right.
climate change is real, just in the way maybe it gets described, I doubt. You know?
All right. Well, I pulled this one up because it's really good to be back home and eating the food of my people. And this guy
Cheese curds and butter burgers.
nailed it, dude. You absolutely nailed it.
What else is
But anyway, this Irish guy is finding out about Midwest food too.
A lot of people told me I'd hate this, so ice cream on the grill, an American classic. Put that fucking down right now. Do not fucking defile our golden Irish bars of joy. Oh, I fucking ran out of breath there. Obviously, I'm panicking. Any normal person would. Oh, we're adding bread now, so it's some sort of a sandwich. Oh, we're having a few over tonight, are we? Oh, cinnamon, of course. It's an American, land of the free, home of the everything tastes a little bit like fucking cinnamon. Zero fucking thought given to the even distribution of the cinnamon. Sorry, I got caught up in a rant about cinnamon and I forgot to tell her to put this fucking thing back
Looks
beside the
fucking gross,
toilet.
dude.
Now she's just assaulting the ice cream with fucking Cinderella's boat propeller. Oh, she's got another implement. Anyway, we'll fucking ignore her for a minute. All I can think about is the poor Kerrygold slowly mixing with that inferior American dairy product. Oh, it's time for the flip. Really satisfying stuff. Bon appetit. Burnt to a fucking crisp. I was thinking it could do with a bit of sweetness, yeah. Anyway, please stop and follow me. I'm delicious.
That looks so freaking gross. I could barely hear that video. I don't know if anybody else had the same problem you did, but I just don't get that. That's not even real ice cream anymore either. Like,
No, by the time
I
they're
saw
done
a
with it.
video not that long ago. Somebody stuck like one of those dryers cartons of vanilla ice cream out in the sun.
Right.
Didn't even melt. It almost
Oh,
started
yeah.
to look like that astronaut ice cream. You ever seen that? The astronaut ice cream?
Yeah.
That's not what it looked like. We do them double barreled around here, like you like to say.
100%.
So let's tee another one up. Let's do
And
that.
I'll just let you know, they're going to be quiet for you, but they're going out at 100% volume.
Perfect.
Yeah. that's
That's all
me.
that matters.
That's
dude.
me minimalizing you having any echo problems.
Perfect.
Yeah. On
Perfect.
your
Perfect.
side.
Perfect.
Let's see what else do we got in here. Oh, here's one that a channel that my wife came across, and this
Oh man, I'm
this
nervous.
dude turns his toddler daughter's babbling stories into music.
Oh, I think I've seen this guy. He plays the piano, right?
To Apple Man. And his name was just Apple the Stula. He really didn't know just where was his Apple mom. His Apple mom was lost. Yeah, yeah. So he was hopping around. He was hopping around. He go to a ferry. She was really a real one with wings and legs. Daddy, yeah, and she blowed some air on him. What? Why? So she could just give him wings, and he could just fly. Oh man, the Apple Man can fly. And he flied and flied and flied and flied, and the ferry flied too. And they go to his house, and guess what? His mom was inside of there. He said, I love you 20, 60 times. I love you, 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 20, 60 times. I love you, I love you, I love you, 20, 60 times. I love you, Apple Mom.
Nice.
I'm digging that 80s aesthetic, dude. Bringing that back.
I couldn't hear it, but I appreciate. I've heard that guy before. He's funny. I read the lyrics; they were top notch.
He said, "I
Gotta
love
say-
you 20, 60 times, dude."
Well, I mean, that's better than some songs now that you see. That, anyway. Well, this first one, we're going to jump right into these things. I
Let's
don't
do
know
it.
how this isn't getting more serious attention. We're going to talk about the Indiana blackouts. I've only really seen people who are experiencing this talking about it. I saw a woman in her car, pitch black outside, talking about the stuff she got from Walmart. And I was like, yo, and at that point, she was like, the power's been out here for 5 days. And as somebody who lives in California and has to deal with rolling blackouts that may last for several hours or maybe a day, and know how detrimental that is to just your food supply, I can't imagine, living through something like that for what is now going on 10 days for some people. There was a time when I was a kid, I lived in Nebraska. There was a snowstorm that cut power for like 2 or 3 days. But I mean, there's a legit reason for that. And there's a legit reason for this too, but I just can't believe this isn't getting more attention. But specifically, this is affecting the northwestern Indiana region. Lake County, Gary, and Portage are the areas affected the most. But there was a storm apparently on the 11th of August, and it's something called a derecho. Reading about this, I've never even heard of it before. Chris, do you guys use that term in Wisconsin? You guys aren't like that far. A derecho torre. I don't know.
It's first.
Yeah, it's the type of storm.
Did you want me to pull up this article that you're referencing, or do you care?
Oh, you don't have to. We'll put them in the Discord. I just,
Perfect.
So
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
But anyway, it's a massive, fast-moving wall of thunderstorms. It's basically produces hurricane force winds across a wide area, and then Gary, Indiana, recorded up to 100 miles per hour winds. And then this storm also brought some tornadoes. There was flash flooding, obviously with the thunderstorms, the repeated rounds of rain, but over 300,000 people lost power in the area, and that's basically 60% of the utility area for the region. But in Gary alone, 300 distribution poles and 44 transmission poles were completely torn down, and then the transmissions lines themselves and the substations and all that stuff, and then all the damage from trees flying and all that other stuff and flooding caused all this damage. So that's exactly why the power is out and these people are living without power. I'm just shocked that this hasn't gotten the attention that it deserves, because being without power for that long is going to cause a lot. I can imagine the actual, not just your personal food supply, but the food around the area. And, thankfully, I guess people can drive out of their area to go get food, and all this other stuff is displacing folks. But I've seen some videos on Instagram of folks living through this who've had to fight other people off because people are doing exactly what you and I have talked about before.
Oh, yeah.
This whole like social contract thing that's only held together by, the fact that there's food and water provided for everybody. People are going to their neighbors looking for supplies. Then, of course, the other thing here that points out to me is just how bad our infrastructure is. Even the Department of Energy has openly acknowledged that the electrical infrastructure alone in the U.S. is first off too old, and then being pushed beyond what it was originally designed to handle. And then, of course, all of this infrastructure, especially the stuff that runs digitally, things that like I'm familiar with SCADA and some of these other things, can be exploited very easily by enemies, like China or Russia, and they have been in the past. But if we were to go into a conflict with them, it certainly would be exploited. And so I'm just curious to you, like, why don't you think this story is getting the play that it deserves?
Yeah, that is the question here, right? And we were talking about this a little bit earlier, and I think that you were really on to something with, the Trump administration has been kind of tripping its own dick on domestic policy issues quite a bit, and something like this in the heartland of America, like you were saying, not that something that you deal with out in California. This is not something that people deal with in Indiana, and it highlights aging infrastructure. It highlights the poor planning of like everybody in the political class, from the federal government all the way down to local,
for decades, to both parties.
Yeah, to local government. And you know what? There's another thing that happens too that is a big part of this situation, and that is local communities kind of falling for the federal money trap. And then as soon as they do, it's like, oh, we use federal money to maintain the roads or to maintain the electrical infrastructure for education and all this stuff like this. And then as soon as the federal funding goes away, those things stop being maintained, right? Because, we didn't get the federal money for it, so I guess the roads don't get repaired this year. I guess the power lines don't get repaired, or the transformers don't get maintenance, or whatever it is. And so because of that, it looks bad on government at quite literally every level. And the citizens should be livid about this, because it also really shows how little the political class, even at your lowest level, don't give a shit about you. Right. And then it also highlights the need for preparedness. A lot of people go their entire lives and they just assume they're going to be able to plug something into the wall, and the phone's going to get charged, or they're going to be able to turn the tap and the water's going to come on, or whatever the case is. And then most people don't have just a very basic stay at home but preparedness plan. What happens if I don't get a meal tomorrow, or if the water stops running, or whatever the case is? And this really highlights that. Like, you should be prepared for basic stuff like this. 100%.
I'm going to plug actually some of the new videos that you're going to start making, because this is exactly one of those things that could happen to you. And some of the videos that you're going to start making are basically about prepping and just adding in some of your Green Beret skills and some of the things that you and your family are already doing to be prepared for something like this. Obviously,
right.
Because you guys live in Wisconsin. Very serious winter storms happen there. I used to live in Wisconsin, way up on the Chequamegon Bay area, right on Lake Superior. Terrible snowstorms up in that area. Some of the most snow I've ever seen in my entire life. I lived on the 3rd story of a dormitory when I went to college, and a snowdrift got all the way up to my window. It's the first time I'd ever seen anything like that. It's pretty fucking. Yeah. And, but it just, some of these videos you're going to start making that you guys can check out. I'm sure a lot of the guys that listen to us anyway are probably in tune with this kind of thing, and probably keep food and water, and maybe even, obviously extra ammunition and all that stuff. But, Chris teaches you how to be lethal, how to not be a loot drop, right? Cool rifle, bro.
Is.
Why are you fat? And then learning some of these skills like first aid, learning how to actually prep. What does your everyday carry need to look like? Not just for your firearm, but for the first aid, the things that you can do for your family. But Chris is putting together a library of this stuff for you guys to be able to go to the show and learn about it, because why not? Why wouldn't you learn from somebody who has the excessive amount of experience that Chris does in some of these things that he used to do professionally in the Army? So that's one of the things we're going to start doing, but it's kind of what I thought about when doing this. But speaking of the Army, I sent you an article earlier today from the Army Times. If you guys didn't know, that's a real thing. The Air Force Times, the Navy Times, the Army Times. But this one was talking about the 173rd Airborne Brigade. It was a drone battalion. And when I first saw you actually, if you have this one preloaded, can you pull this article up so I can see it real quick? I just want to show people the title, because this is the same article. Oh, and first we got a shout out to Eric Holt, who jumped in the chat and just decided to drop, I think, what comes out to roughly like $60 for 5 subs for people. That's probably the 5th time at least you've done this on the show.
Thank you,
You
Eric.
fucking rock, bro. Seriously. If you guys don't know who Eric is, please go find him in his episode. Maybe Colts Walker, who's badass and likes doing this and dropping the link for some of the older shows in the chat. We'll go do that. But check out his book as well, the things that he has gone through. He was also on Andy Stump's podcast. I believe he did a podcast with Dan Holloway from Citizen. He definitely did a podcast with Adam Dorito over there. Some of the other people that we hang out with. But anyway, please go check out Eric. Eric's story is actually amazing. When you think about Americans standing up for what it is they believe in and trying to uphold, the things that we hold so dear as Americans, Eric is definitely one of those people that you should learn about. His modern story of trying to just basically protect his rights as an American. So, but if you want to pull that article up real quick, we'll kind of jump into talking about this drone brigade. There it is, U.S. Army, and this is from Ground News. Again, if you guys don't know what Ground News is, it's a news aggregator, and it'll show you the blind spots for on the left, the right, the center, who's talking about it, who isn't talking about it, and it will show you all of these articles and levels of their factuality, very factual, not factual, all of these different things. So you can go and you can read. If you really want to know, am I reading something that's truthful? Well, you can go look at the score for the articles that they suggest to you, and you can get the best one. But this one says right here, U.S. Army moves to end drone battalions set up to absorb lessons from the Ukraine war. Obviously, a lot of people have feelings about the Ukraine war and the amount of money that we gave them. But the lessons from that war are some that we should absolutely be learning. And like I said, the 173rd Airborne Brigade has had about 600 soldiers in Europe operating as a specialized drone warfare battalion for quite a while now. These guys have basically spent the better part of a year building drones, experimenting with first-person view or FPV systems. So if you guys have seen those videos of those drones following soldiers or vehicles or whatever, somebody's being remotely controlled it, that's a first-person view drone system, and obviously those are a problem. But also working on the incorporation of artificial intelligence with these drones, figuring out how to operate drones through jamming, all of this stuff that the Ukrainians have having to been deal with the Russians, and then obviously vice versa, but we're not spending the time with the Russians to learn this stuff. But the Ukrainians have actually been insanely good at developing modern 5th gen drone warfare, not just in the air, but at sea as well. So companies like Saronic, I think, are some of the ones that are learning from that too. But now the Army is shutting down this battalion, and the acting chief of staff, is this guy's name is General Christopher Levine, directed them to return back to a normal airborne infantry unit after 2 really big exercises that took place in Germany. They said they're essentially, these guys are going to package up what it is they learn and then distribute it broadly throughout the rest of the Army. I would imagine it's going to go, of course, to a lot of the regular, just, 11 Bravos, some of the other, I'm sure that, well, at least even 2, when I, this was 8 years ago now, deployed to Kenya, the ODA that we were there with was incorporating some of these drones as well. So it's been a thing for a while, but just those tactics and how it's changed warfare today weren't really going on in there. But my question immediately, right, when I saw this was, what the fuck? Why are we stopping doing this? And then I did the thing that I tell you guys to go do and not get pissed off at the title and just leave it at that and go read an article, because I did. And essentially, it's like I said, they are distributing all of this that they've learned into the regular Army. And I guess they've decided that having a niche group of soldiers existing for that sole purpose, that's kind of run its course. But they're not separating themselves from learning from the Ukrainians. And the point is basically is that they announced this like force-wide Army doctrine overhaul specifically built around American drone dominance. And ironically, I saw the Department of War made a post about drone dominance today. But the doctrine around drone warfare has constantly changed. It is, it's basically like buying a cell phone. By the time you get the new one, the next one's already coming out, and the one you've got is obsolete, is basically what it is. So they're trying to get away from having these systems where you have to spend 5 years writing doctrine for technology that's going to change every 6 months. And I agree with that, which is the point of reading an article. My question behind this is, who is going to inherit this battalion's job? Because their job specifically was to just war game and learn from these guys. If you're, pushing them back out to their regular duties, and Chris, I think this might be where, maybe some of your insights, could come in and sort of explain this, but would you think that this is going to become a job for a wider swath of people, and that maybe that some of these exercises and some of these, I guess, learning laboratories, as we would call in the Air Force, are going to happen more as TDYs and things like that, and not just like a static battalion assigned to do something like that?
Yeah, it would seem to me from reading through the article that this was set up to capture a lot of information that was coming out very quickly in a short period of time, and to really be able to isolate those lessons learned in Ukraine specifically, and that it was never meant to remain that way, but then to take that knowledge and spread it out to the force very quickly. In all reality, there's entire units in the Army that are already designed to do this, and that is their job already. So it would seem that they were either at capacity or weren't able to absorb the information fast enough, or there's another possibility too, in that when you kind of leave your line unit behind, right? If you're that infantry squad leader or whatever, you leave that line unit behind and you go to like one of the laboratory units like you were talking about, or a unit that's designed for JSETs, which are joint combined exercise trainings, or things like that, where you exchange training protocols with foreign military partners and things like that. You kind of lose a little bit of the sharpness of your skills, from your home unit. And so when you take guys that spend, an entire assignment there, like 2-3 years or whatever the case is, and then send them back to the line, it usually takes them just a little bit to get spun back up and get plugged back into their line unit, right? Where it seems here, one of the advantages is they pull guys from the line, set them immediately to absorb as much of that information as they can without getting rusty from their line unit, and then sent them back and closed it down. So honestly, like you, it seems a little bit concerning on the surface, but actually I think that this might be one of those times where the military leaders did the common sense thing and seemed to do it well and didn't allow this to become something that exceeded its sunset usability. And then let's get the information where it needs to go as quickly as possible. So, but also, right, time will tell. Like, did it work as intended? That I don't know. Like, I would have to be in one of those units to see. But
yeah. Well, Chris, I want to kick it to you before I start talking about Evergrande and the CCP, something that I know that you wanted to bring up tonight as well.
Yeah, this story out of New Jersey is absolutely insane to me, and I got 3 articles pulled up here that I'm gonna work through. That I'm pulling all of this information from, and I'll drop those in the Discord server for you guys tonight. As Brandon and I are moving back into doing more domestic policy stuffs, guys, we will get that channel inside, or that sub channel inside of the Discord, back up and running and drop all of the information. I'll make it part of my post show battle rhythm again to drop all the information so you guys can go in there and see that. But essentially what's going on in New Jersey is sort of quasi through a probe that was happening from the federal government, which found roughly 250,000, what the federal government is stating, illegal migrants in the United States that are on the voter rolls, and those are spread between a few states, New Jersey being one of them. It also came to light that about 6,600 illegals were registered to vote in the state of New Jersey. When the press started reporting on this, the governor over there, and I don't want to get her name wrong, I want to say it's Cheryl, Governor Cheryl, she immediately turned around and blamed the software company that developed or the software came from for the DMV there in, I don't know if you're supposed to say this acronym out or if it has like a phonetic, but it's IDEMIA is the company that was running. Okay. And essentially they developed the software that the DMV was using, and New Jersey is one of those states that started auto-enrolling people to vote when they showed up to get driver's license, and then is also letting illegals get driver's license. So when she was confronted with this, she immediately rolled over on the company and said that it was a software glitch by this IDEMIA company. Sure. Well, their spokesperson came out and said, absolutely not. There is no software glitch for us. We can show the data right here where all these 6,600 illegals checked no when they registered for their driver's license, that they were not a citizen of the United States. And then it's somewhere between the data that we delivered to the government in New Jersey and the voter rolls coming out, that data got interfered with by a human being, and then those people got registered to vote. One of her other retorts, I'm back to the governor now, was that, well, they may have been registered to vote, but they were registered as Republicans, Independents, and Democrats across the board. So you can't say that it only favored one party. Don't care. That's not a that's not a defense for what's going on here. Right. And then of the 6,600 that were registered to vote, well, we only see about 400 of them cast ballots, and it wasn't enough to sway any of the elections or whatever. And if that wasn't bad enough, and then she did say, hey, we've dictated that all these people be disenrolled from voting. Okay, and then we're conducting our own investigation on it. Okay, whatever. And if that all wasn't bad enough, them rolling with the don't look here, it wasn't our fault, it was IDEMIA, blah, blah, blah. The federal government came in and said, okay, well, that's really cool. We'd like to see those 6,600 illegals that you registered to vote. Well, New Jersey went to the mat and is refusing to turn that data over to the federal government, and is protecting them, right? Protecting these illegals. And then on top of all of that, if all of that wasn't bad enough, New Jersey is offering $20 million, up to $20 million in free legal services to those non-citizens who are registered to vote. So if they get brought up on any charges, which New Jersey pledged, they weren't going to charge any of them, whether they illegally voted or not, because, oh, it was our fault, and New Jersey's deciding to be super magnanimous about it. And we'll disenroll them, but we're not going to charge them because it wasn't their fault that they voted. That one was on us. Whatever. But not only that, but they're also pledging $20 million in free legal services. So this is taxpayer money to defend these illegals in the event they're brought up on any federal charges. So this story is insane, from the level of almost certainly somebody somewhere in the New Jersey government was manipulating data coming out of the DMV in order to enroll illegals in the voting rolls, and only at the point that they got caught tried to roll over on the software company, who pushed back, and good on the software company for pushing back on that and putting egg in their face. But after all of that, now they're going to the mat and defending these people and using taxpayer money from the state in order to provide free legal services for them. So tell me that your government not only doesn't give a shit about you, American person, but is willing to go above and beyond for people that aren't even from here to make sure that they can, vote, move the needle on culture issues, on government issues, and then when they get in trouble, then they protect them. It's wild to me.
It's same shit, different day, right? And the funny thing is that so many liberals would sit there and hear this and be like, well, there's only 600 people. Like, that's not enough to sway.
6,600.
60, you said 6,600?
Yes.
66. Okay, well, still, they're gonna say, "Oh, well, those only a couple thousand people." Like, that's compared to the national number of voters. Like, that's a drop in the bucket, etc. Meanwhile, I'm sorry, but the number of people, the correct number of people that should be registered to vote in this country that aren't citizens is 0. And I don't care if it was 6,600 people registered in the state of Florida or Texas or any of these other states that are like perennially red. If there are illegals voting in the elections, I don't want it at all. Whether they were voting for Republicans or Democrats, it doesn't fucking matter to me.
Exactly.
But that's exactly the stance that most of these guys are going to take. And it's crazy because I remember a couple of years ago, you and I did a show with Adam Dorito where we were talking about how this was the plan. This is what they're going to do. They're going to take all these illegals and they're going to use them for voting. And we had some fucking retard get in the comments and be like, that's not true. You can't prove that. Even if you're talking about a dozen people, you're talking about a couple of hundred people, as if a dozen or a couple of hundred or 66 people isn't the fucking problem, right? Isn't part of the problem. It isn't too many people. It's like Joseph McCarthy. Even one communist in the U.S. government is one communist too many. If there's one illegal voter in this country, that's one illegal voter too many. That's it. There should be 0. This should be a moot point. And the fact that we've now gone for how long since the president has brought forth and Congress has been brought forth on the SAVE Act, this has not gotten passed. Meanwhile, all of these things keep happening. And, they go into these places that are run by the state, right? Like the DMV, and then the state worker blames a private company for these issues, right? Well, like, no wonder any of this funding that comes from the federal government, and I'm talking mostly about like California here, and New Jersey is typically very blue as well, and has a lot of this infrastructure. No wonder that they go through these state systems, right? Where, of course, like, we want states to have control over their own systems. I believe in smaller government, but at the same time, like, they're being exploited for these things. And both of those things can be true at the same time. I want smaller government. I want things to be pushed back to the state to make decisions for the people that they represent, and not having a national mandate for certain things, right? But like, at the same time, it's okay to say that they're being exploited, and they're using their institutions, these state institutions, to exploit the national decision making that goes on. It's just a problem. And it frustrates me to hear somebody who just would hear everything that you just said and minimize it and be like, that's only 6,600 people in a country of almost 350 million. And then try to just basically pretend like this is a you're talking about a non sequitur or something like that. Like, that's fucking dumb.
Just to be maximally accurate, I don't think it's called the DMV in New Jersey. I think they call it the Bureau or something like that. I just call it the DMV because that's what it's called in Wisconsin. So it's like we're talking about the same bureaucratic institution or whatever. But Lily Mae in the chat just brought up a really good point, right? And it may be 6,600, but one illegal vote will make it so that you have to undo that vote. And so now you're talking about 13,200 votes, right?
Yeah.
Because it disenfranchises an American citizen when they vote. And that's an excellent point.
Yeah. I was just gonna say one illegal voting in my county, voting the opposite direction of me, is just canceled out my vote, and I'm a citizen, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So so and again, if you need an argument about why you should get off your ass and not just vote in presidential elections, but all these other elections that happen in your state and county,
right?
This is why.
Yeah.
Right.
100%.
You make this mistake of thinking like it'll get handled or somebody's going to go and vote for me. Just this like ambiguous somebody on the other side of this decision is going to solve it by their participation. Like, don't get mad at them. Don't get mad at the result. Get mad at yourself if you don't participate in these things. You really have nobody else to blame other than you. But
one last thing I wanted to say on this before we jump off of it is it also shows the difference in mentality kind of between the two parties. So while Republicans are actively trying to like drive their people out to vote, Democrats aren't even like really trying to play that game anymore. They're working behind the scenes to try to control the infrastructure of voting itself. That's their plan. So this type of stuff should absolutely petrify anybody. We talked before about the Francesca Hong story here in Wisconsin and the thumb drives that showed up in the middle of the night. And this stuff that never happens keeps happening over and over. And it should show you, and people should be waking the hell up to realize that while, Republicans are putting signs in their front yard and being like, hey, don't forget to get out to vote, which is really good. The other side is actively trying to change the infrastructure of voting itself and put their hands on the scales behind the scenes.
Well, and how many elections, I'd be curious about this, how many elections maybe in a state or national elections have been swung by 6,600 votes or less?
Or less, yeah.
Right? Yeah. Probably, I would be willing to bet quite a few. And I'm sure you could look that up and be like, look, like this is exactly it. 6,600 people voting makes a fucking difference. Absolutely. So I just, and the other thing too, the last thing I'll say, and I want to start talking about Evergrande and the Chinese Communist Party, but is that there's going to be people that will forget about this. And then there'll be another instance of this they'll find in like Georgia or Arkansas or Texas or whatever. And then they'll just treat that one like it exists in a silo too.
Right.
And they'll have forgotten because this one got brought up 2 months ago and it, magically has been, black holed and forgotten about. So
it was like that one year we had the Lahaina fires, and then we had that toxic spillage in Ohio back to back, and then right after that you had people were like, oh, how are the people in East Palestine, Ohio, dude? Are they still are they still, because they just out of sight, out of mind, dude.
We're gonna be hearing about that in 10, 20 years about all the different fucked up cancers and shit that are going on there. But speaking of people getting black holed, I'm gonna talk about Evergrande and the CCP. So Hui Ka Yan, I don't know if you fucking say his name. Who's the founder of Evergrande. This guy just got sentenced to life in prison in China. And bottom line up front, right? I love this. Great. Still hate the CCP. Glad this guy's in jail. But the point and why I want to talk about this is that this isn't about how the CCP is doing good by throwing this dude in jail, or as I've seen this been spun online by a bunch of people, that the CCP throws billionaires in jail, right? The situation and the separation, I guess, between this guy and the CCP is literally just geography, because that's how shit works in China. If you are the owner of Evergrande, you are 100% sitting under the thumb of the CCP, and they're telling you exactly what to do. So they're complicit in this, is the point I'm making. So is the CCP imprisoning this dude for life because he's a corrupt piece of shit? Yes, but I repeat myself. It's not because the CCP is altruistic, right? They are just as behind this as this guy is, and he's just the homie going to jail over it, essentially. Yeah.
He ran out of his usefulness.
That's what it is, man. But we had David Zhang on a couple of years ago to talk about this, and we had a big conversation about ghost cities and Evergrande and some of these other realty companies in China. But Evergrande was buried underneath hundreds of billions of dollars of Chinese liabilities, and there was massive accounting fraud. There was bribery. There were people who even bought homes that were never finished and having to pay mortgages on that. I can't even imagine having to do something like that, right? So of course, like, yes, this guy needs to go to jail, but Evergrande is one of the largest property developers on earth, and they operate inside of one of the most heavily controlled financial and political systems on earth, talking about the CCP. So Evergrande has to borrow from CCP controlled financial institutions. And they bought enormous amounts of land from local governments. And this actually, we had a really good breakdown of this in that David Zhang episode. I'm not going to give the whole thing here. If you want to learn more about the actual intricacies of this, you can go watch it. But essentially, those local governments depend on land sales for revenue. Then they would buy it, they would hike up the price and basically sell it for more than they bought it for. And it's just like this entire massive spin cycle of liquidity to keep all this shit afloat. And the number, the money that they were selling it for, essentially, it's made up. It's not real. The point of it was to buy property and develop it, and then they never developed it, but then we're selling it as if it was developed. Does that make sense?
Right.
And the CCP knew that these guys were doing this and were dangerously over leveraged. And that's why the CCP eventually imposed a couple years back, this made national news, these restrictions specifically designed to force Evergrande and some of these other groups to reduce the amount of debt that they were carrying. And this guy, whatever, I don't remember now. His brain is my name. His name has gone out of my head because it's a crazy one.
Hui Ka Yan.
Hui Ka Yan. Hui Ka Yan.
Oh, Yan.
Oh, man. Hui Ka Yan. But he was welcomed into the CCP establishment is the point I'm trying to make here. He attended the Chinese Communist Party's centenary celebration in 2021, which is basically when Evergrande's problems were already becoming impossible to ignore. It was affecting the global economy because of the way it was forcing to the CCP to respond, right? And I really only wanted to talk about this because I'm so sick and tired. Like, yes, the Chinese throw these guys in jail, but it's not like arresting Sam Altman or somebody else, right? Or just name somebody who's independent of the government for the most part because of the way the U.S. is set up. Obviously, like Sam Altman is a little more in bed with the government now because of OpenAI. But any of these big, billionaires here in the United States, Elon Musk, whatever, any of these guys, because the Chinese state government holding this billionaire accountable is not the same as it would be here in the United States. And they're certainly not going to hold themselves accountable. So it just ticks me off when I see all these fucking idiots online, basically talking about, at least the CCP is dealing with, billionaires and dealing with corruption. When essentially the CCP is just standing on the ashes of all these people's mortgages that they're paying with no fucking houses, everything Evergrande is, and then just pointing at this guy and saying, like, we solved the problem because we threw him in fucking jail. Like, that's not it at all. They are just as equally, if not more, complicit in this problem than this one fucking guy is.
Yeah.
But they know that the West is going to be like, oh man, look, they threw this billionaire piece of shit in jail. And then there's gonna be retards that get online and be like, yeah, go China. They would never do this in the United States. And it's like, yeah, I wish they would do shit like this in the United States. But this is not what it is that you're marketing it as.
Yeah. They pull out moves like this whenever they need to, spend a life to gain +1 legitimacy or whatever the case is. Yeah.
Well, just think of the Binance guy back in the day. You want to talk about, like, we talk about crypto and we talk about like what he did. Binance is its origins in China. They fucking basically memory hold that guy, black hold that guy. You didn't see him for fucking years.
Gone.
This is decentralized currency, which is a big fucking no-no, for the renminbi. Everything they do is on something called WeChat.
That's kind of why I'm super surprised that video came out not too long ago. It was like last year or whatever, of that CCP individual that got escorted out of a meeting while Xi Jinping was sitting in there. And the dude's like,
you're talking about one of the former chairmen.
Mm-hmm, yeah. And I'm like, I'm really surprised that knowing that footage was going to get out to the West, that they allowed that to go through and they didn't ambush him in the hallway afterwards or whatever. But it could be, I don't know, like what kind of like personal security he had or whatever, and that was the time he was most vulnerable. But yeah, it's they're usually better at their propaganda game than that.
I think that was on purpose. I think that the point of that was the propaganda, because it was showing the world that the consolidation of power is sitting up underneath Xi Jinping even more than it was, and even more now than it was then. And that's him essentially removing any sort of I guess loose end, or somebody who that some of these folks that have agreed with him that he's gotten rid of could appeal to, thinking he has some sort of leverage.
Sure.
And it's a message to the world because they feel confident enough to push that level of propaganda. Like, everybody knows that the power is consolidated up underneath Xi Jinping and whoever's been, Hu Jintao in the past, or any of some of these other guys, but by removing him. And then too, if you remember, that guy looks at him and is appealing to him, like, you're removing me from this seat, right? And Xi Jinping just keeps his head and eyes forward the whole time,
right?
Which is in of itself a message, right?
Yeah.
I guess you could say he tried to remove this guy peacefully because somebody taps him on the shoulder and asked him to leave, and he wouldn't, of course, and he's dragged out of his freaking chair. But that's what it is the propaganda is the consolidation of power in a more cement, sort of way up under Xi Jinping. So with that one, I would say. But did you have another story that I'm forgetting, bro, that we were supposed to talk about?
No, we swapped the one out to.
I figured,
to talk about the Gary, Indiana thing, which is nuts.
Well, dude, let's palate cleanse, and let's jump right into the battle update brief, and then the grip. We'll get into these things, and while you palate cleanse, double barrel style around here, I am going to go do what I do best and drain the main vein, and be right back. So,
heck yeah!
You want to kill my camera feed for me?
Bye. Reach down in here and see what we got, guys. And just for y'all.
C4 Energy. Apparently, this energy drink is nefarious for making your skin itch because it contains beta-alanine. The fuck type shit is that?
5-hour energy!
Yes, sir!
Shall look like piss! Ladies and gentlemen, 5-hour C4!
I am so cooked. All right, let's try it. Tastes pretty good, not gonna lie. Skin's good.
Add the whole joint in that joint, what the fuck?
My skin ain't even twitching. After waiting for an extensive long time, I feel nothing.
What the fuck are my balls and shit? What the fuck is sticking up my leg? My fucking butt is and shit!
Dang, it feels like ants are crawling all over my skin.
Holy shit, I shouldn't have done that! I thought that shit was a myth!
Can you imagine your entire channel being about that? I don't know why that guy puts himself through that. Oh, man. What else we got in here? Here's a little, throw a little vet humor at you guys.
Welcome to the Stolen Valor Show. We're going to spot the fake veteran. All right, we got our two contestants here. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves real quick? Danny served in the Marines. Once a Marine, always a Marine. 0311. Jose, Army Infantry, fucking 11 Bravo. All right, hard to tell so far. Let's start out with a technical question. Max effective range of the M4. Max effective range is 500 meters, point target. I can also tell you about the new M27. Nice. Max effective range of the M240 Bravo. Dude, I honestly don't remember, man. Not a good start. Question, what does POG mean? Write on a sheet of paper there and show me at the same time. Good job. I'll allow it. It's hard to tell. One of you could just be following a bunch of Instagram pages. All about guns. Tell you more. All right, yeah. Was our job. Nerd. Nah, I need something that proves you were there. Reenact the scariest sergeant you ever served with smoking you guys. Everybody get the fuck down and start doing some push-ups. I can do more duck walks or... Okay? And you? Everybody get the fuck down. Can't do the simple shit, right? 1, 2, 3. Just kind of repeats that expressionless for about 5 hours or until your tendons fall off. All right, yeah, I know it's you, dude. Yeah, it's me. Also, you gave off a little I'm dead inside vibe. All right, yeah, thank you for coming.
I am dead inside. That's what it was. It was the dead life.
I love that guy's channel, dude.
Gave him away, dude. I like the ones where he's the vet, like in the office.
Right. Oh yeah.
Anyway.
Well, I think that you should do the bub first tonight, because I am going to get into some pretty complex financial stuff when it comes to the Treasury and Scott Bessent, and then, of course, the Federal Reserve. And it's going to be a little longer than normal. And so I feel like you should do the battle update brief first.
Let's do it, man.
Let's do it. What is the battle update brief, Chris?
Yeah. So let me pull up my notes here, guys. I don't do this stuff completely and totally by memory. But welcome to this week's battle update brief, guys. This is your one-stop shop for foreign policy analysis, military intelligence, operations analysis by a former Green Beret medic and also a former intelligence analyst. So let's go ahead and get into it. Right now, one of the most critical geopolitical chokeholds in modern history is systematically breaking wide open, and the political fallout inside of Tehran is accelerating rapidly. Yeah, tonight we are going to be talking about what is going on in the Strait of Hormuz and giving you an up-to-date brief as of the recording of this video tonight of what the situation is over there. Because for the last 5 months, the Islamic Republic of Iran has attempted to hold the global economy hostage by shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. Closing the strait was Tehran's ultimate, let's call it ace in the hole, the primary leverage point that they believed would force the West back down after the air campaign kicked off earlier this year. But that calculation has collapsed. And over the last few weeks, the United States military established a heavily armed, heavily escorted transit corridor through the strait. Maritime tracking and open source intelligence are confirming that U.S. Navy and Air Force escorts are successfully pushing up to 15 million barrels of crude oil a day through this route. And that is rapidly approaching right now the pre-war baseline, which was about 20 million barrels a day. And the way that they've done it is carving out this corridor closer to the Omanian coast. So a little bit further away than Iran can effectively target. And at the same time, I'm tracking a profound shift in the rhetoric from the highest levels of the Iranian leadership. In recent public statements and back-channel diplomatic overtures, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Mojtaba, it's not Ali anymore, but Supreme Leader Ayatollah Mojtaba Khomeini, if he is indeed still alive, and senior Iranian government officials are signaling an active desire to bring this war to a rapid close, but they're carefully framing this off-ramp around a specific narrative, and that narrative being that Iran is concluding hostilities strictly from a position of strength and establishing deterrence. We'll be done with this war when they're good and done with it, is what they're saying. And we're going to use, I'm going to use this segment tonight to break down how the U.S. military has blinded Iran's coastal defense network. I'm going to analyze the IRGC's desperate attempts to widen the conflict into southern Europe, because that's the thing they're trying to do. And I'm going to work on dissecting the complex political psychology behind Tehran's sudden push for a diplomatic exit. And when I say complex political psychology, I'm being very nice to the Iranians and all that. It's not that complex. The bottom line up front, though, is this. The U.S. military has manually pried open the global energy spigot, effectively neutralizing Iran's economic weapon. Facing depleting missile stockpiles, shattered coastal radars, and an economy that is on the brink of total collapse, Tehran's leadership is scrambling to negotiate an off-ramp while they still have enough tactical leverage left to claim a domestic victory, and they're betting the American political cycle is going to help them do it. Spoiler alert, they may not be wrong in that. If I was them, that's what I would be betting on too, in fact. So to understand why Tehran is suddenly looking for exits, we're going to have to look at the timeline over the last 5 months, because back in late February and March, following the initial air campaign, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, declared the strait closed and began seizing commercial tankers, deploying naval mines, and then launching anti-ship missiles. And I'm sure we can all walk down that memory lane together and enjoy it, because they, Iran cast naval blockade, and then Trump casted a bigger and a better naval blockade. He saw there, I see your blockade and I raise you one blockade. It was kind of a thing to behold. But at its lowest point, commercial tanker traffic through the world's most critical energy choke point dropped to near zero, stranding dozens of vessels and sending global crude prices skyrocketing. And if you guys have been watching the show long enough, you'll remember Brandon and I talking about, the Chinese crude, CREWED, not CRUDE, the Chinese crude tanker that was stuck in the strait when that happened, and the U.S. allowing it to exit, which everybody jumped on and said, it was the sign that the United States was unable to enforce their own naval blockade, and which is just total and complete propaganda bullshit that we debunked in real time. But that was fun, wasn't it, Brandon? So anyway, Tehran assumed the global economy could not stomach a prolonged blockade. A safe bet for them. But when the U.S. military committed its logistics and marine power, that assumption disintegrated. It is evaporating right now. And under synchronized escort operations, the U.S. Navy directly challenged Iran's blockade line. So today, the U.S. is not just pushing occasional ships through, they're running massive synchronized convoys right along or right through the Strait of Hormuz on a daily operational schedule. It's kind of a thing to behold. The operational environment inside the strait remains one of the most compressed and dangerous maritime corridors in the world, measuring barely, 21 miles? 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. So to mitigate Iranian land-based threats, the U.S. military carved out a wide transit route hugging the territorial waters of Oman, like I mentioned earlier, maximizing the distance between commercial hulls and the Iranian coastline. The force movement is strictly regimented. Commercial tankers are being organized into large convoy packages, and then during synchronized operational windows, an outbound convoy exits the Persian Gulf while an inbound convoy transits into the theater. And U.S. Air Force fighter aircraft are maintaining continuous air combat patrols overhead. I guess I should say combat air patrols. That sounds better in my head. They're maintaining continuous combat air patrols overhead, while U.S. Navy guided missile destroyers flank the commercial formations to provide layered air and missile defense. So the reason this convoy system is operating at near normal capacity is that the U.S. kinetic strikes have systematically dismantled Iranians' coastal radar and surveillance architecture. So over the last several weeks, precision strikes blinded Tehran's coastal tracking installations, and the IRGC really can no longer maintain continuous real-time targeting telemetry on vessels that are moving along the Omani coast. In fact, we basically reduced them to playing battleship. They know, they have a 21 mile wide at the narrowest track, and they're basically just shooting blind into there and hoping to sink a battleship, as it were. Iranian forces are currently relying on a patchwork of restored legacy radar systems and fast attack reconnaissance craft. But because they lack accurate targeting data, the IRGC is essentially reduced to blind firing one-way attack drones and cruise missiles into broad coordinate grids where they suspect convoys are moving, rather than engaging in any type of locked targeted strikes. So battleship, like I said. The IRGC's response in the Gulf has degraded into an expensive low-yield harassment campaign. While several commercial vessels have sustained minor shrapnel damage, the U.S. defensive umbrella continues to intercept the vast majority of incoming Iranian munitions. So every missile Iran fires blindly into the Gulf is a multi-million-dollar asset burned for zero tactical gain whatsoever. And they can't keep doing that. So because their leverage in the Gulf is slipping away, Tehran is actively evaluating asymmetric alternatives. And this hurts my, Tehran is actively evaluating asymmetric alternatives to force Western concessions. Excuse me. I had a thought that doesn't fit here. Recent intelligence reporting indicates the IRGC Quds Force is exploring contingencies against U.S. and allied targets in southeastern Europe, especially examining facilities in Bulgaria and Cyprus. So we are currently we're tracking intelligence indicating that Iranian networks have accelerated the transfer of disassembled drone components into Europe and attempting to utilize local criminal networks and sleeper cells in order to circumvent border controls. So this brings me to the most critical political development of the week, the shifting tone from Tehran's leadership and how it directly ties into the American political calendar. In recent days, President Pezeshkian, say that 5 times fast, and high-ranking IRGC commanders have begun actively messaging a desire to end the conflict. And they're wrapping this message in a deliberate information operation, insisting that Iran will only conclude the war from a position of strength, like we said up top. But they're signaling a desire for an off-ramp. So that is a big change. And I assess that Tehran is simultaneously playing a dangerous game of delay. No duh, right, Chris? But stick with me. According to open source analysis, Iranian leadership is intentionally playing for time during these ongoing negotiations. And they're closely watching the upcoming midterm elections, as we all are, in November, and the growing domestic friction in Congress over the War Powers Resolution. They're simply making a bet that the United States government is going to follow the same pattern that it has for decades, in that the midterm elections are going to become a referendum on the party in power and that Congress is going to shift. Again, not a bad bet on their part. If I was them, I would be betting the same thing. The Iranian calculus here is pretty simple and pretty straightforward. They believe that as the election approaches, domestic pressure in the United States, things like high gas prices, inflation, and public war fatigue will politically corner Washington. And then Tehran is betting that if they can stretch these negotiations closer to November, the threat of shifting legislative power is going to force the presidential administration to offer a highly favorable, watered-down ceasefire just to secure some type of political win before voters go to the polls. And they're actively testing whether the American political cycle is more fragile than the Iranian economy is. That's their bet. For 40 years, the regime told its domestic population and its regional proxies that the Islamic Republic held the ultimate veto over the global economy through the Strait of Hormuz. And now, though, with 15 million barrels a day moving under American naval protection, that deterrent is visibly shattered in front of the entire world. And they need to negotiate a ceasefire now using the U.S. midterms as leverage, because they know that their actual negotiating strength is going to be significantly weaker even just a few weeks from today. So they are under a rapidly dwindling clock. The economic economic implications, my mouth's turning to mush, of this dual reality, the maritime recovery and diplomatic signaling, are already hitting the market. So by restoring crude flow up to 15 million barrels daily, the U.S. military is actively taking the geopolitical risk premium out of the market. And this stabilizes refined fuel prices globally and prevents the catastrophic supply shock that was feared early on in this conflict. For Asian energy consumers who purchase roughly 89% of the oil transiting the strait, if you followed this channel before, you've seen us do a lot of analysis on this, particularly Brandon. The lesson is absolutely crystal clear. China and India are watching the United States Navy ensure the physical arrival of their daily energy supplies, underscoring that American maritime dominance remains the sole guarantor of the global commons. And that's honestly a good spot for us to be in. That says a lot. But I don't ever just tell you a bunch of stuff that is without letting you know what some of the intelligence gaps are, and there are some here. Specifically, I'm tracking 2 big intelligence gaps as this diplomatic maneuvering continues to unfold. First, I don't have any unclassified confirmation of the degree of internal friction between President Przezkian's civilian administration and the IRGC hardliners. We've reported on it here before and elsewhere, but the IRGC and their mosaic defense in depth strategy, right? They're basically, I think it's 41 different provinces right now, all led by different military leaders, operating independently and autonomously of each other. So not quite sure how much political power the Iranian president has in order to stop the IRGC from doing IRGC things. And while government officials, are messaging a desire for de-escalation, elements of the IRGC command structure may prefer continued asymmetric escalation to justify their institutional dominance. So that power struggle inside of the Iranian government is real, and it's also ongoing while all of this is happening. And then secondly, I'm closely monitoring the operational readiness of Iran's deep underground missile complexes in order to determine whether hardline factions might launch some type of final high-density saturation attack to create a symbolic victory before any political pause is finalized. That would absolutely be in their MO. In military planning, we usually plan for the most dangerous course of action or most catastrophic course of action, and then we usually plan for the most logical course of action. Different terms, but that's the idea. MD COA. Anyway, sorry, I just triggered myself right there. But anyway, this sits not necessarily in their most dangerous course of action, but actually more towards like their most logical course of action. This is fits their pattern and fits their MO. So it's something to keep an eye on and to be braced for. All right, so let's round third and head for home. I'm going to wrap this up with my final assessment. I believe that what we are witnessing here in the Persian Gulf is a masterclass in the application of conventional deterrence and logistics, and that hurts my unconventional warrior's heart, but this is why the big army and the big navy are never going anywhere, and you have to have conventional forces. The United States did not need a full-scale ground invasion to dismantle Iran's ultimate geopolitical weapon. And also, if you've been following us for a long time, that was something that I have stated and Brandon has stated that we were extremely concerned about, was boots on the ground and this becoming Iraq 2.0. Like a lot of other people were pointing out. But if you've paid attention to us, we have maintained the hard line that the War Department never signaled that was something that they were planning on doing. The presidential administration never signaled that was something that they were planning on doing. And we've maintained the hard line here that we didn't see, while there was a lot of fear mongering going on, we didn't see the buildup or the military traffic to indicate that was something that was going to happen. We saw a buildup of like QRF type forces and like the Marine Expeditionary units, again, in like a security posture type buildup, but never the buildup that would have been required to put thousands and thousands of boots on the ground, multiple brigades on the ground in Iran. So I'm going to pat us on the back for that. We were right, and you were ahead of the curve if you've been paying attention to our analysis here around that. But by systematically taking out coastal radars and establishing a protected transit corridor, Washington called Tehran's bluff in a huge way and effectively broke the blockade. And when Trump says that they can essentially declare Hormuz property of the United States, this is one of the times that he's actually not being hyperbolic. It's pretty much ours, and we own it. The sudden rhetoric from the Iranian president and the Ayatollah if he's alive, talking about peace from a position of strength is not a sign of confidence. This is a classic playbook of a regime looking for an exit before its structural vulnerabilities are completely exposed. And by playing for time and trying to leverage the U.S. midterm elections, they're trying to lock in a diplomatic off-ramp while they still have enough operational hardware left to claim that they held the line, as it were, and maintain that institutional legitimacy within their own country. So if you're watching this from the United States, this is what a direct return on investment looks like. That's how I'm going to describe it. American hard power secured the global commons, stabilized the energy market, and forced a regional adversary to seek terms without committing tens of thousands of American ground troops to a protracted occupation. This regime played its strongest card, and the table didn't. So that's what I got for you guys tonight. I hope that you enjoyed the battle update brief. If you got something out of this, if it was value added to your day, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe, follow, depending on what platform that you're watching this. Leave a comment down below and let us know if you have any stories that you're following, foreign policy or anything like that, that you would like to see us do one of these breakdowns on in the future. Always trying to tailor this for you guys so that you get the. So thank you for sticking with me on that, and let's move on with our night.
Let's do it. Well, I do believe we have to palate cleanse before we jump into this massive geopolitical recon intel politics brief, or the grip, as we like to say.
I'm not gonna lie, I'm looking forward to.
You're low key looking forward to it.
I want to hear your.
Looking forward.
I want to hear your analysis on this. Like I really do. But
it's a lot of pressure.
Nah, you always kill it, dude. All right, check this one out.
Oh, dude.
That's Clint Eastwood?
That's not.
What?
That's Clint Eastwood?
What the fuck? Oh, son of a bitch. Motherfucker. What was that shit?
What are you talking about? I thought this was your favorite movie.
It is my favorite fucking movie. There, motherfucker, there!
That ain't you!
That's me! Son of a bitch! Oh, motherfucker!
Bro, I wish I could have met that woman when she was like 25. Like, what was she like then, you know?
She's probably one of those people that were just born old, dude.
The firecracker, dude. Probably,
it just stayed that way.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Let's see what else we got here. I think did you send me this one?
I don't know. Let's see it.
I think you might have said.
I think so.
Oh.
Catch the fucking ball.
I love that that's Napoleon Dynamite.
Oh, no.
Right? Gosh, Tina, eat your dinner.
Fat Lord.
Fat Lord.
Dude. If you know that reference, man, you're from our generation.
Right. Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's millennial core for sure. But as Chris said, I want to talk tonight about Treasury bonds, which I realize probably sounds like a great way to lose everybody immediately. So stay with me, because what happened this week in the bond market and then over the last week really touches on almost everything people are already talking about. Of course, the national debt passing the 40 trillion mark this week. Inflation, which we talked a lot about when we did the episode on Weimar Germany, the differences between inflation and hyperinflation, but energy prices specifically, and then of course the Fed. So we're going to talk about all that, and then what Scott Bessent is trying to do, whether or not we've got a real fiscal shot as of Americans getting out of this. But I'm going to try and make this as easy to follow, and I have some analogies and some other things going on around the world and around the US that I think will add helpful context and examples that will make it easier to understand too. But first, there is a version of all of this going around online that says essentially the Treasury market is broken now and is breaking. That what he did only worked for a day. Nobody wants American debt anymore. Which, if you know anything about bonds, it's how the United States packages up its debt and then sells it. Scott Bessent has started doing something as well, accusing him of something called quantitative easing, which I'll explain, from the Treasury market. And then he's working his way toward essentially the U.S. Treasury taking control away from the Federal Reserve. And then also something which is a really scary thing if you pay attention to this market, something called yield curve control, which I'll talk about as well. And that yield curve control, which has happened before, is going to happen again. And most of that narrative online, and there's a lot of guys that do these like financial breakdowns and then realtors and stuff like that talk about that because of the housing market, do all these breakdowns. And I think it's some of this is a little dramatic. Some of this is very Chicken Little. But the more interesting story to me is that people are still perfectly willing to lend money to the United States, which is part of the narrative that I just said isn't true. They are simply demanding more money in return for doing it. I know that sounds really weird, but particularly when we ask them to lend to us for 20 or 30 years is what I'm talking about, which is still not a great thing, but it is not true the way it's being painted. But what it means is that the U.S. government is intervening. So I'm going to start with the simplest possible explanation of what a treasury bond is. And that is the United States government needs money. So it sells an IOU. You give the government money today. In exchange, it promises to pay you interest and return your principal at a later time, hence the IOU. So when you buy a 30-year treasury bond, you are essentially lending the government money until 2056 if you bought it today. You think about everything that could happen between now and then. Inflation could be worse than you expected. Interest rates could be much higher 10 years from now, 20 or 30 years from now. The government could borrow trillions more after you make your investment. Maybe there's simply somewhere better that you could have put your money after 5 years if you'd have locked it up someplace else. So if somebody wants your money for 30 years, you are going to have to charge them for taking on all of that uncertainty, which is a major proponent of lending money, obviously. And the additional compensation is part of what an economists would call the term premium. It is essentially hazard pay for time, and investors have already been demanding more time. And the yield on the 30-year treasury reached roughly 5.4%, which is the highest level that we've seen since 2007. And of course, what happened the year after that, right? 2008 housing market crash. Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, they had to get bailed out. Well, Lehman Brothers didn't get bailed out, but Bear Stearns did. There wasn't enough money for Lehman Brothers to get bailed out. But this is where this first bad claim about what's going on is really wrong. It doesn't mean that nobody wanted to buy American bonds, and that the recent 10-year treasury auction, which received bids basically 2.5 times the amount of the debt that's being sold, and the 20-year auction was also around 2.5 times covered, and then the 30-year auction was about 2.5 times covered as well. So there are buyers. So imagine, let me explain this to you this way. First analogy, I'll give this to you guys because I find that analogies are the best way to get people to understand them because it contextualizes in a way that most of us can relate to. But imagine that I put my house on the market for 800 grand and 20 people show up, but the highest offer I got for that house was 700 grand. Right. So I don't get to walk outside and announce essentially that nobody wants to buy my house because the highest number that I got for a bid was lower than what I was asking. Plenty of people wanted to buy the house. The housing market simply just disagrees with me about that price. And that's much closer really to what's happening here. Investors are still wanting to lend the United States money. They are charging more to do it. And this is where I want to also explain one thing that gets kind of confusing, because people say that the bond market is going up without specifying what that means, the bond market going up. Bond prices and bond yields, these move in opposite directions. And keep that in your mind as I explain this. And if you go to buy an existing bond, its price rises and its yield falls. If people sell the bond, its price falls and the yield rises. These are the opposite directions I'm talking about. So if you think of a bond that promises to pay you $50 a year, if you have to pay $1,000 for it, that $50 payment is worth 5% of what you paid. And if everybody dumps that bond and its market price falls to $800, the same $50 payment you had is now a much larger return relative to that purchase price. And that's why bond selling pushes yields higher. And when the Treasury yields rise, they become a more expensive benchmark for borrowing throughout the rest of the American economy. And then corporate borrowing gets more expensive. And that means mortgage rates can face upward pressure, which is like long-term financing, and all that gets harder for you, right, as the consumer. And the market is then imposing discipline and also having to say why the free market will fix it, which is, obviously as a free market country, what we're supposed to believe in. You have to sort of qualify that statement when you say the market will fix it. And again, that's not going to be a quick fix, but the free market will absolutely price this problem. By that, I mean, if the investors think America is not paying them enough, yields will rise until buyers come back. But the market's version of fixing the price can mean expensive mortgages, businesses having to cancel investments because financing costs too much for them, the federal government handing over larger pieces of the budget to bondholders. People holding American debt is what that means. And the market can essentially tell Congress what borrowing is going to cost. And it can't pass a budget for Congress, but that's ultimately the political part of this problem. You're talking, obviously, money, passing a budget, and then what that's going to actually look like. And then obviously this is where the whole Scott Bessent thing from a couple of days ago comes in. 2 weeks after the Treasury made a regularly quarterly financing announcement, which is something that typically happens. And this quarterly announcement I'm talking about was with the 30-year yield sitting at about 5.4%. The U.S. Treasury basically announced unexpectedly that certain long-term debt buybacks would increase from a maximum of $2 billion to at least $4 billion per operation beginning in September, so next month. And that's another thing to remember too, because P was getting accused of a bunch of things that didn't already happen. He just made an announcement, and that announcement affected the market, but the thing that he was talking about isn't going to happen until September. And the 30-year yield fell sharply after that announcement, right? And it recovered a good portion of that the next day. And that's this gap I was telling you about again at the top of this, where people are like, oh, look, it didn't work. And this is what's called a reversal. It's really interesting that $4 billion is a small amount of money, which is odd to think about. But you set that besides the Treasury market, which is measured in tens of trillions of dollars, and it you can really start to see why it's considered small. But the Treasury did not show up basically with enough money to overpower the entirety of the bond market. And this is an exception, right? Exception about what the Treasury is willing to do next, because it's odd to think about money as like a living thing, but what you do to it, you cannot always predict the outcome, right? And the market essentially is hearing the government say, we noticed what is happening and we have to become more active in what's going on. And essentially, Scott Bessent said later after this that those purchases would get higher or grow. And because the market doesn't price necessarily what is happening today, it prices what they think will happen tomorrow. That's an important distinction, because you're kind of taking a bet on what's going to happen. And if the Treasury Secretary demonstrates essentially that he is willing to increase purchases when long-term rates become really painful for consumers or corporate consumers or like corporate buyers, investors are going to immediately begin asking what the threshold for that pain is going to look like. And that basically means like how much longer those purchases could eventually become, I guess. That doesn't make what he said an actual policy, because the Treasury buybacks existed essentially before this sell-off. They have perfectly reasonable uses in these actions. The old Treasury secretaries can become harder to trade than newly used ones. The Treasury can repurchase some of those bonds to improve liquidity, meaning the amount of money in there, and solvency would be the opposite of that, but to make the market function more smoothly. That's the bet they're making. But the important thing is to understand that a buyback is essentially not a mini QE, quantitative easing, and that's getting thrown out a lot. And I think it's getting thrown out because of basically how devastating it's been in the past. But quantitative easing is a Federal Reserve policy, and the Federal Reserve buys securities and pays for them by creating Federal Reserve liabilities, principally reserve balances in the banking system. The purpose is to usually loosen financial conditions that the economy is experiencing, especially by putting downward pressure on longer term interest rates. So like the money that you're holding, right? What's a long-term interest rate? Your mortgage, right, is an example of that. But a Treasury buyback is different than that. A Treasury buyback can buy back an existing government bond, but the federal government still has to continue to finance itself at the same time. So the Treasury is not creating a central bank reserve, and the US government's underlying borrowing requirement is not going to go away at the same time. The Treasury says the bonds it repurchases are effectively replaced through other financing. Think of somebody who owes money across a bunch of different loans. You've got a mortgage, you've got a car loan, you've got a personal loan, you've got credit card debt, all of these things, and you only refinance part of it. The terms of your debt are going to change. The maturity dates can change, and maybe the entire thing that you've got becomes easier to manage, right? Like think of a loan consolidation, a debt consolidation loan. The money that you owe is still there. It just is easier for you to manage, I guess, because now you're paying less amount of money, but at a higher rate over time. And that is why saying that Scott Bessent and these buybacks he's doing are quantitative easing is wrong. There is an important distinction as well to give you, because essentially the Federal Reserve is currently buying its own Treasury securities. Those are primarily Treasury bills or T-bills, which you've heard Scott Bessent probably say a lot the past couple of days, but other securities with maturities of 3 years or less. The Fed calls them reserve management purchases. They began after the Federal Reserve judged essentially that the bank reserves had fallen to what it considers an ample level. That's a real term. The Fed stated purpose of doing this is to make sure that there are enough reserves in the banking system to implement its short-term interest rate policy with reliability. And that means you feel like it's reliable and they feel like it's reliable. And the Fed itself is explicitly distinctioning that those purchases from quantitative easing, because they are concentrated at the short end and are not intended to push long-term rates down or to stimulate the economy. That's a lot of fucking stuff I just said. Chris, I know you can hear me. Is it making sense that way with some of these analogies?
I'm doing my best to follow you, man. I'm honestly trying to sketch this out on a whiteboard over here.
So there.
But yeah, I'm following you.
Well, the big accusation essentially is that the Federal Reserve isn't buying treasuries anymore, which is wrong. And if somebody says that they are, the new long bond buybacks are quantitative easing, it's also wrong, which is the things that I just explained. And both of those can be true at the same time, essentially, that there's also an older Federal Reserve strategy called Operation Twist. It's useful for essentially understanding the general concept that the Fed changed the maturity composition of some of these bonds that it owns, selling or allowing to short securities to mature while buying longer securities. And the idea essentially is to influence long-term rates without having to expand the total size of somebody's portfolio. And the Treasury is not doing Operation Twist either, but the resemblance for saying that and making that comparison is that the government can sometimes influence long rates by changing how much long duration debt the private market has to absorb, the private market being us, right? And so the bigger question with that is, why does Scott Bessent put so much emphasis on caring about the long end? And the reason is because the United States owes a fuck ton of money. And more of that money is gradually being refinanced into a higher rate. And he said this week that there is nothing magical about roughly $40 trillion in gross federal debt and that America can grow out of it. And he took a lot of flack for that. I mean, technically, he is economically correct that you can grow out of it. And $40 trillion by itself does not necessarily say whether or not the United States can carry that amount of debt. It can't. If you tell somebody that they owe 500 grand, you can't tell me whether or not they are in trouble until I tell you whether or not that you earn $50,000 a year or $5 million a year, or whatever it is they make, essentially, to be able to pay that off. And countries work the same way, exactly. And the more useful measurement of that is whether the debt compares to the size of the national economy. Could a country like Belarus carry this much debt? No. Does that make sense? The total size of the economy is essentially measured by your GDP, or the gross domestic product. It's basically the value of goods and services that we produce as a nation. And the debt that's held by the public, us, that's currently around 100% of the GDP in the United States, which is a big fucking number. The Congressional Budget Office projected this, that under the current law, it is expected to rise roughly to 120% of GDP by 2036, so 10 years from now. And this 10-year projection is important because it essentially pressure tests what they're betting on into the future. And the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, isn't essentially projecting that the United States is going to stop growing. It continues to forecast that the United States is going to grow while the debt burden still gets bigger. And net interest is also projected to rise from roughly 1 trillion to about 2.5 trillion by the year 2036. So he's right that the economy can grow, right? And that is important. But the 10-year numbers don't necessarily support is the idea that the growth currently expected is enough to stabilize the existing fiscal sight picture, essentially. So yeah, you can grow out of this, but that's not the current projection. Does that make sense, Chris?
Makes sense to me, yeah.
Yeah. I know this is kind of fucking intense and maybe boring. So let me know in the live chat.
It's 11 o'clock at night in the here. Let's talk about economics.
No, but I mean, like, this is honestly important because we are at $40 trillion in debt, and he's trying to manage these things by involving the government in all these processes, right? And the federal government essentially is running what you would call a primary deficit, and it's again is a pretty easy concept to explain. And the money that the U.S. government collects, you subtract the money that they collect by what they spend, and you leave the interest payments on top of the debt out of that calculation. So you're not calculating the debt when you do this, which means you're already in the hole by doing it. And the primary deficit is around 2.6% of our GDP at this time. And then you add the interest on top of that. And then that net interest is then another basically 3.5% of the GDP. So imagine I tell you that, essentially my financial plan is to get a bigger paycheck so that I can get ahead of my credit card debt. It sounds reasonable to say until you realize that even before I make a minimum payment on my credit card, I am still spending more money every month than my paycheck is bringing in. It sort of doesn't matter if I have a higher paycheck because I'm still overspending. And, that raise, maybe let's assume it comes from a much harder job. So the problem was saying that your growth is essentially the problem solver. Well, growth can be very, very difficult, right? It could be also something that's extremely variable, which it is here, because you can't necessarily predict the growth. Even what I said earlier about the growth that we're predicting is doesn't show that sort of trajectory, but that could also be wrong, right? So, but it doesn't matter necessarily because the US government is still digging a hole and trying to climb at the same time. And if you look at the numbers from yesterday, when I pulled some of this stuff to talk about it today, the publicly held debt is around 101% of the GDP. And the primary deficit is about 2.6% of GDP, and then an average effective interest rate of about 3.4%. So when he says you can stabilize with growth at 6% growth under these assumptions, you're not paying the debt down. You're essentially stopping the debt burden from getting worse relative to the economy. So it's a band-aid. It's not an actual fix. You're putting a bullet or a band-aid on a gunshot wound, as it were. And if the government's average interest cost eventually rise to 4% while the deficit stays where it's at, the growth requirement is going to rise, maybe by another couple of percentage points, if that makes sense. So those are scenarios essentially. They're not an accurate forecast of what is exactly going to happen. And the fact that the 30-year Treasury is still above 5% doesn't necessarily mean all of the existing federal debt right now is going to cost 5%. All of the old bonds that I'm talking about are still going to continue to mature. And the average rate on that debt is going to continue to adjust at the same time. So the United States is essentially continuously letting its debt mature, gets older, the cheaper debt is going to roll off, the government is going to refinance it at whatever rate it exists and can get, and then those rates are going to stay up for years because the interest is slowly going to work its way up through the federal budget. Like I was just explaining about the credit card thing. You can see essentially why the Treasury cares more about the 30-year rate being above 5%. And you could see why the difference between a temporary market spike that we saw 2 days ago now and a structural change in borrowing is a big difference. So, Chris, when Scott Bessent says we can grow our way out of this, listening to what I explained, do you think he's wrong?
No, I'm not. I'm going to say no. I don't think that he's wrong in the sense that I'm optimistic about things like this, and I'm always going to put my money on both the American producer and the American consumer, right? However, I think that the most poignant thing that you said is the statement that you made about America is continually digging a hole while trying to climb. I think that that statement right there, from everything else that you said, all of a sudden clicked in my brain, and I was like, nailed it, got it.
Well, and the other part with this too is, and I agree with you that no, I would say no. Same answer you have. I would resist the temptation to say that this is like slam dunk. You know what I mean?
Right.
But the argument very much has real merit. And another analogy for you that really ties into this whole digging and climbing out at the same time thing is that the United States used to produce a lot of stuff, right? And we still do, but it's very different than the way we used to do it. And a country that can become dramatically more productive can make an enormous amount of debt much easier to manage, right? And the Congressional Budget Office modeling shows that even at sustained half percentage point improvement in productivity, U.S. growth can produce a massive difference in our long run debt trajectory. Like I said, 2036, 46, 56. And half a percentage point sounds pretty small, but when you compound half a percentage point over 30 years, right, it's a lot bigger, which is essentially, to me, the strongest case for what he says. And he's essentially trying to build around energy, AI, automation, industrial capacity. So I think some of these problems are going to begin looking like they're getting remedied. I don't want to say remedied in a permanent sense. The more a lot of this reindustrialization we've been talking about comes online more. And then the job market that'll come with that too. The problem with it, though, is that growth doesn't necessarily stop the fact that you're in a primary deficit, if you remember the definition I gave you a few minutes ago. But if the economy continues to grow while the U.S. government continues running this, climbing and digging, larger structural deficit thing, then you're going to end up essentially with a bigger economy than you had and a much bigger debt problem at the same time, which isn't exactly a solution. So if I had to frame exactly what he said, I would say that obviously growth is indispensable. We have to continue to grow as an economy. You can't have a negative GDP. You can't have a stagnant GDP. That has to happen. And growth by itself on a fiscal path that we're currently on is not a complete plan, meaning that growth isn't the only thing that's going to solve this problem. And that's essentially, to me, where energy becomes part of what this looks like in the bond market thing. And we have a lot of inflationary pressures right now. Obviously, some of it's being exacerbated by Iran, the situation going on there. You know, diesel as well, not just like crude oil. The diesel refining margin, which is essentially the difference between the value of raw and then finished diesel, and then crude oil. You know, all of these things are basically above $100 a barrel for the first time. But global refining runs have been basically millions of barrels per day below what they were a year ago, in the middle of the same disruptions that we are fighting against now. And then on these attacks that have been going on with Russian refining, some of the things that you've talked about, Chris, with some of these attacks by Ukrainian drones, right? But shipping is the other part of this, which you also mentioned in your bub, because it has a lot more physical constraints as well. And one of those would be in like a place like, think of like river distribution. So like maybe a big river like the Rhine, which runs through Germany and Europe. It's a very, very shallow river. And then you have the Panama Canal, which has to essentially reduce the allowable draft for some of these large vessels, meaning that they have to shift the water. But those ships can't carry as much cargo as they would before. Then another area that's big and affected this is the Black Sea, obviously, and that involves what's going on in the region too. And that is basically one of the largest areas that Europe gets grain, right? So the war in Iran isn't the reason, but it is part of the problem. It didn't create our national debt. It didn't create this primary deficit that we're in, but it's already straining a system that's already strained, if that makes sense. And then the Federal Reserve essentially is not going to be able to fix any of these problems on their own. They can make your mortgage more expensive. It can slow down construction costs. It can make a business have to decide whether or not it's going to be able to hire more people. And if they have to hire more people, it means they now are a bigger business, and therefore they have to start offering medical insurance to people, or they have to start offering options for investment, as a part of the pay structure for some of these people. Then it can't manufacture essentially the fact that there's going to be missing fuel or missing construction components or anything like that to be able to repair infrastructure here in the United States, or anything that's getting destroyed around the world because of this stuff. And so you're talking about a physical shortage of goods, right? And the Fed's basic options for this stuff is to weaken the demand for these things because they're being destroyed or not being able to be carried as much. And people essentially are going to stop bidding on a limited supply, right? Because what happens when you have a limited supply, Chris, and people are bidding on it?
Prices go up.
Prices go up. Exactly.
That I know. Supply and demand, I know.
Exactly. A very, very brutal way, essentially, of trying to stop a supply problem, right? And essentially, that's why there's like an emergency gasoline waiver that Trump brought out recently, too. It's temporarily relaxing some of the seasonal gasoline requirements, which like people travel more during the summer, typically. And you can expand the pool of gasoline legally and make that more available for sale. But that gasoline is what's being reserved, right? Or what's already in the ocean being shipped. It's not another refinery to increase the supply. Does that make sense too? Like you're pulling from something that already exists. You're not creating it new, right? Does that make sense? It does essentially attack the supply constraint that I was talking about from the side of the supply, instead of asking for us to destroy the demand to bring the price down. So that's kind of a fix, but it's not a good fix. And the Strategic Petroleum Reserve as well fits into the same box that I'm talking about. We have 172 million barrels as part of our international emergency gasoline release valve, I guess you could say. And then the reserve obviously had fallen to basically 293 million barrels by this month. But essentially, the claim that the Trump administration is draining the Strategic Petroleum Reserve because we want to use it to control Treasury yields is wrong. in my opinion. And I think that there is an indirect relationship with that and what's going on with the economy. And that's why I bring that up. I think is a decent example as well. So the point I think at the end here I'm trying to make with some of this stuff is that there's a bunch of things going on trying to fix these problems, but they are not necessarily things that are long-term fixes. And then some of the things that they're hoping to do with those long-term fixes, what they can do does not put the United States on a trajectory to try to say that those problems are going to be solved by the end of this 10-year period or 20-year period or whatever. Does that make sense, Chris?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, no, it's okay. I'm just going to start. No, you're good. Cause I'm going to start jumping into like some of this like stuff with China here. You know, the point, to tie it back to the point with JD Vance that we had the other day, right? About this is not the same thing, right, as China wanting to like be the reserve currency and what they would jump in on there. Obviously, China would benefit if America damaged its confidence so much around the world that nobody wanted to participate in American petrodollars or the bond market. But China has an enormous manufacturing base, and I just spent time talking about American manufacturing. But the reserve currency essentially also requires foreigners to trust essentially the financial market that you have enough to store trillions of dollars inside of your market and then move money freely out of it whenever they want. That's a very important distinction. So the United States has a better option than China because we can squander some of that advantage by not participating in this. And we should essentially pretend that China has an interest in becoming the financial system. And I think it's important to say that because the longer this goes on, you're starting to see essentially a broader strategy of inventing a solution to a problem rather than having actual fixes. Does that make sense too?
Yeah. Solution seeking problems. Classic.
Yeah. And then obviously like in 1942, the Federal Reserve agreed to essentially hold treasury bill rates around 0.375% and basically cap those things on long-term treasury bonds about 2.5%. And so that right there is an example of what I talked about earlier about yield curve control. And yield curve control means that the central bank is going to target the yield on a government bond, and then it commits to buying enough of those bonds to defend the target price that they set for themselves. It's kind of cheat, but there's a very important difference between that and what this is today. Because if the Treasury announces that it's going to buy $4 billion in buybacks, the Treasury has essentially told you how much it plans to buy. It's told you the price. And under actual yield curve control, the government tells you the interest rate it intends to essentially defend on the target price. And that amount has to be purchased, and that the amount that has to be purchased becomes unknown, right, to meet that target interest price. Does that make sense? And suppose that the U.S. Federal Reserve says that the 10-year treasuries are not going to ever be allowed to yield more than 2.5%, then you as an investor can look at what's currently going on with inflation and essentially say there's no chance that I'm going to ever lend the government money anymore for the next 10 years at that rate. And then somebody still has to buy the bonds, which is bulk debt, to sell if that yield is going to stay at 2.5%. So the government has to take care of that problem. That somebody, basically becomes the central bank by doing that. And that's the supply and demand mechanism that I was just talking about with you underneath this whole thing. Because if everybody is selling bonds, then the bond price falls and its yield rises, like I said at the top of this. And then the Fed has to enter the market with newly created reserve balances and becomes essentially a huge new source of that demand. And essentially that is going to push the bond price upward, making the debt more expensive, which is what I was saying at the top of this. Then bond prices and yields are going to move in opposite directions. The yield is going to fall. And if the Fed goes one step further and tells investors that it has to buy as much as necessary to stop the 10-year yield from crossing over the ceiling that's set for it, then you as a trader know that you are now essentially competing against a buyer with basically unlimited money. And that is how a yield control curve control works. And nobody wants that. And it's very, very poor for the economy. But that's my final point, is that this is not yield curve control. And this, I think that this band-aid fix that's going on with some of these things and trying to push out how it's going to be solved, that there's really only so much that somebody like Scott Bessent can do to try to solve these problems. And the biggest solution for that is actually reindustrializing the United States, is my point. And I know that was a really long grip, but this is people tend to want to stay away from finances, and they want to tend to stay away from like economic stuff like this. But like, this could be the difference between like you being able to continue to afford your home or business and not being able to continue to afford your home and business. And explaining these things to you and like these very macro mechanisms that the US government is doing, specifically the Treasury and the Fed, who are two separate entities, obviously, and you understand what they're trying to push out, you can basically try to forecast for yourself what the impact is going to be for you as a person. And that's why I basically wanted to talk about this, even though I knew it was going to be probably fucking long-winded and probably a little boring and complicated, but hopefully some of the analogies I gave you guys make enough sense to where you can conceptualize this shit and I don't know, take action on it and learn something, basically. That's it, man. No, definitely need a palate cleanse after that shit.
I'm really glad that you spent the time working through that, and I see that as like obviously part of the benefit that we bring as a channel, that we don't shy away from stuff like that, and it needs to go out. But I was thinking as you were talking, this might be a stupid question, so if it is, just swat me down. But do you think that this is basically the Trump administration manipulating the levers that it can from the executive branch in order to force the hand of or make the Fed play ball? Because I know that there's been a sour relationship between this Trump administration specifically and the Fed when it was underneath Jerome Powell, and even though he's no longer the Fed chair, I think it's Kevin Warsh now, as of May, but he's still on the board of governors over there and has immense sway over the Fed. And there's been a very sour relationship there. So do you think that that's part of this, or do you really think it's just like an oh shit, pull lever because of emergency and try to get some short term?
I'm just going to respond to Colts Walker very fast. This is current labor laws make it impossible to reindustrialize the United States. Yeah, no, I completely agree that all of that is a massive problem. But to answer your question, I think the thing that would concern me more is if the U.S. Treasury was repeatedly increasing long-term purchases immediately after bond yields spike, or if it deliberately shifts bond issuance away from the long debt, specifically to push longer rates lower, which is going to increasingly depend on the short-term borrowing. And the thing I would look at for that is to pay very close attention to if the Trump administration began treating very particular Treasury yields as levels that the market is not allowed to cross. So you're talking about constraints. The biggest line essentially would remain the Federal Reserve. But the Fed, if the Fed changes monetary policy because the Treasury can no longer tolerate the market interest rate, despite inflation still requiring tighter fiscal policies, then you're talking about like a very different conversation than the one that I was just having. And that would be, to me, like the moment where, a fiscal dominance essentially stops being just something that, we're talking about, and I guess becomes an actual description of American policy. And by American policy, I mean like U.S. Treasury, the Fed policy. And to me, that like, I don't want people to leave this conversation thinking the United States has already crossed some point of no return, right? I think that there are still choices. I think that what may be actually the most important thing in all of this is Scott Bessent saying that he can feels like we can grow our way out of it. Whether that happens is yet to be seen. I want much of his whatever his thesis is to work as much as possible, producing more energy and removing bottlenecks like Colt Walker bringing up that essentially is going to make production more expensive, and building out industrial capacity more so that it increases our actual national productivity and then our resilience to be able to respond to the global market. To me, I think this is also why Scott Bessent keeps talking so much about stable coins and Treasury buybacks, and then also like rate cuts, and saying like blockchain can do that for us. I don't know so much about that. fixing the structural gaps, I guess, between what the U.S. government spends and then like what we collect from like taxpayers and some other things. Those are voluntary decisions that the government has to make, but because they are voluntary decisions and they're not forced to do those things, to me, I would view those voluntary decisions more as like a manageable thing versus being stuck inside of a decision that you're like painting yourself into a corner with. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, it really does. And I mean, at least one thing that we can count on is that the Trump administration is staffed with people that are highly qualified in all of their fields and know exactly what they're doing, right?
Walker's on it, dude. Really, automation truly is one of the ways to bring some of that stuff back, without a doubt. Like I mentioned it at the top of this, like that's going to happen. Like people are so mad about like data centers and water usage and all these things. And I did an episode on that, like kind of debunking some of this stuff, because I think people don't even realize how old data centers are, and that some of this water usage data that keeps getting put out is on water usage for data centers that are like 30 years old. But like if essentially that is what the history for the United States shows from World War II through when, like in 1951 or 52, the Treasury, the Federal Reserve Accord was established, essentially that the U.S. government has tools for making debt easier to finance, and one of those ways is through industrialization. And really, the thing that where it begins to get uncomfortable is what sort of tools you see the government reaching for to try to decide the market price of the debt the U.S. government owes. That's basically, what their actions or what you want to look at, not necessarily the projections, I guess, if that makes sense.
You didn't catch my tongue-in-cheek joke there?
No, I missed it. What was it?
I said at least the one thing that we know is that the Trump administration is staffed with highly qualified people that know exactly what they're doing in their fields.
Yeah, some incompetency there at the Department of War. Yeah, absolutely. That is some inside baseball there. Anyway, that was the grip for this week. I know that it was a long one, very, very technical probably, but I mean, dude, this is the whole point of why I want to do a show, and I'm really glad that you guys watch this show, because you're always going to get high level analysis from both Chris and I, and even if it is something that's more technical and maybe a little bit more difficult, at least you walk away learning something, even if you have to go back and watch it again like Ratchet does sometimes. So I look at the Coltswalker says, yeah, data centers are not a new thing. I was helping install a data center in Nebraska over 20 years ago. Exactly.
Yep. All right, you want to cleanse that palate, dude?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
When I see you again, when I see you again.
This game kind of sitting this fun.
White dude just drinking his mayonnaise. What about him? All right. Barrel number 2 coming at you. Check it out. I just got so excited, dude. Homeboy put a glizzy roller on his John Deere.
How can you be mad at that at all, dude? The only thing you need at that point is like a cooler attached to the side with some beer in it,
And I know you couldn't hear it very well, but Creed was just blaring.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Was it like Higher or something? What was it?
Hold me now.
Hold me now. I'm 6 feet from the edge.
There you go. All right, where do you want to go now?
Dude, let's jump into Coltswalker's favorite segment and do the neuron breakdown.
Oh, shoot.
Oh, shit.
Is that really going to play? Oh. I just didn't have it monitoring. was like, that better be playing the music going on. All right,
Oh,
so anyway, let me go ahead and get this pulled up for you. So I specifically chose this one for you today, dude.
Am I gonna need to hear it?
No. Not a lot going on as far as that goes, but so this is from the Police Activity channel. Been pulling a lot of the no knock breakdowns from there, guys. If you want to go find them over on YouTube, and they just do lethal police encounters and stuff like that. But brief you into the situation here. Baltimore, Maryland on November 6th. This is in 2022 at approximately 3:40 p.m. Officers responded to a call for a man armed with a knife assaulting a woman on the ground near the intersection of West Lafayette Avenue and North Fulton Avenue. So that's what the call was. Let's go ahead and get this pulled up, and you guys can check out what happens when the police officer responds. Here we go.
Hey, send more units, send more units. Get down! Signal 13, get down! Get down! Shots fired! Shots fired! Shots fired! Shots fired! Send more units! Send more units! Sir, drop the knife! Drop the knife! Sir, drop the knife! Hey, back up! Back up! Sir, drop the knife! Hey, swing around! We need a crime scene, hurry up! Get that! Hey, drop the knife! Drop the knife! Sir, drop the knife! Drop the knife! Drop the... Don't move! Don't move! Ma'am, are you okay? Don't move! Sir, don't move!
I think that's about it. And then they cuff him. That rolled by real quick. Do you want to check it out again?
No. Looked like I was actively in the process of stabbing that girl.
It was really hard to see because of where the body cam was, but she basically emerges on camera from under his support arm, under his left arm, and you see her roll out. So when this dude comes diving out of the squad car, this suspect is on top of her, actively trying to stab her with that butcher knife.
I mean, officer perception is exactly what you have to go with here. You know, we've talked about Graham versus Connor before. Somebody's going to get mad about how many rounds he dumped into that guy. But like when you shoot, you're not shooting and waiting to see if somebody stops. You're shooting until that person stops. You know, cops are not trained to shoot somebody in the leg or shoot a knife out of somebody's hand or whatever the fuck crazy shit people come up with. That also is not the opportunity to use a taser either, or to necessarily jump on top of that guy and try to pull him off of her, because what if you become incapacitated, and now you being the person there to defend that situation and that person, protect life, right, is now incapacitated or dead. To me, completely and totally good shoot, in my opinion. Unfortunately, that shit like that has to happen. I think I've seen this video before, because he does, after he stops dumping on that guy, he still picks up the knife and moves it, and he tells him to drop the knife again before putting another round inside of him. And like he, you know, it's kind of where he stops, but that's it, man. You're told to stop until the threat stops, and that's literally what he did. And obviously, he kind of secures the scene. I think he could have like reached in there and maybe grabbed the knife away, or at some point somebody was probably tensing up, or kicked the knife away at some point, which is what you probably should do if the suspect is still holding a weapon. But I mean, to me, you know, at that point, what you're worrying about is preserving the crime scene, making sure the person that was being assaulted is okay. And then there's obviously bystanders around there, because there's apartment complexes, and you saw a couple of vehicles pull up that weren't cop cars, or at least they weren't marked police cars. And there's going to have to be people, those people that are there, and now inside whatever your, you know, the size of your law enforcement cordon is for that crime scene. So, you know, at that point, to me, I view that as a good shoot. You could see through the windshield probably when he pulled up what was going on. He pulled up, draw it, and took care of business, man. Like, it's unfortunate somebody lost their life, but like, it's better than the other result, you know?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the only nitpicky thing that I would have had is, as that guy slowly dropped the knife, would have been to step forward and remove that knife from the situation, like just kick it away, which I didn't see him do. But that's like super Monday morning quarterback thing. He had the suspect incapacitated and he's holding security on him now and locking the scene down. Like he really did everything that he needed to do. And I think you're right, man. People are going to see that. They're going to be like, there was no reason for him to mag dump on that guy, which he legitimately mag dumped. He went Winchester. And that last shot, by the way,
what you got to do,
was brutal because he reached up to key his radio as that guy went to go sit up off the pavement again, and he just came out with one hand and put that 17th round in there. If it's a Glock 17, which it looked like he was carrying, that's 17 rounds in the pipe, or in the magazine. But you made such a good point. It's like, why did he fire so many rounds? Because the suspect continued to be a threat. The suspect did not stop moving and was still wielding a knife. And so it's like, I was engaging until the suspect stopped.
Right.
So I agree with you.
This is what you're supposed to do. Yeah,
it's pretty cut and dry. But tactically, super cut and dry, obviously.
Oh yeah.
But the reason I pulled that one
not
up,
a lot to unpack there.
The reason I pulled that one up tonight is to kind of tackle that point of how much is too much, because people want to scream and cry like police brutality, but what about that young woman that was still in that situation, still within arm's length of that guy that was wielding a knife, that was actively trying to kill her, and that cop is there trying to save her life, and he will not stop aggressing. Right?
Exactly.
So how much is too much?
That's literally what you're instructed to do. You if you're going to shoot somebody, you do it until the threat is over with. That's what happens. If he would have dropped the knife and rolled over and clutched his back after the first shot, then that's what it took. But that's not what it took, Yeah,
Lily Mae is saying he immediately started calling for more units. Don't know if moving to kick the knife was a good idea at the moment. That might be my military training coming out. I fully admit I'm not a Leo guy. I don't have law enforcement training. So
that's what I was trained to do.
We look at tactical situations a little bit differently than cops do. But it just seems to me that removing the weapon from the scenario is the safest thing for everybody, because at any point, if it's within arm's reach of him, a blade can become a projectile in a moment of this guy grabs it and then just decides to fling it across the parking lot or something like that to do something weird. Now you have a blade flying through the air because it was still within arm's reach of him and he wasn't deceased or unconscious yet. So no, that's where, to me, I think removing that blade would still have been the rightest of all answers, but that's being nitpicky on it. That's where my reasoning is coming from.
I agree with you. I said that as part of my breakdown. That's what you're supposed to do. It's all part of also reducing the threat and then de-escalating. Right. If he's no longer holding a knife, then the situation is significantly de-escalated. So
sure. Alicia Victoria coming in with the $2 Rumble rant. Thank you so much. I work at a police store. A new coworker is dumb as fuck. She asked a cop one day why they don't just use their non-lethal objects on alleged criminals. Yeah. And then another $1, she said she also asked if batons and mace are actually non-lethal. Yeah. A baton can be very lethal if wielded correctly.
Yeah, depending on how you use that, I guess. I guess technically you could make mace lethal depending on how you use that too.
Splitting wigs, Alicia.
Yeah, man, that's always one of the most annoying questions, especially people that think that tasers are like this catch-all solution for so many things.
Right.
Tasers fail all the time, and it's not even necessarily a technical issue with the taser.
Right.
It could be the movement of a suspect. It could be a bad shot you got off. Any of these things.
Well, that's part of the. I made a breakdown of the Corey Ruiz incident in Madison, Wisconsin. I don't think it's launched yet, but it will. You guys can go check that over on the Instagram if you want to see the breakdown of that. But in that incident, they tased him twice to no effect, and then it eventually went lethal because he also reached into his waistband or somewhere on his person and pulled a knife on cops. And one of the reasons that the tasers may not have been too effective was because there was 3 officers in the process of grappling with him. At least during the second tasing attempt, there was 3 officers that were in physical contact with him while the taser was deployed. Right. So
Correct.
Just backing you up on that point, everybody likes to think that tasers immediately incapacitate a person, and in the best of all circumstances, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Well,
That's
only
the
for a
best
small
you get.
period of time.
And then only
you
for
get somebody that can fight through those 5 seconds and then get right up after that. You know what I'm saying? Like,
right.
And then there, so many movies also show how like a taser knocks somebody out. Like that's not fucking right either. Taser isn't going to knock you out. Go watch a video of somebody getting tased. It's quite the opposite. You know?
Yeah.
I tell you, as somebody who's been tased, it does not knock you out.
Once electricity stops flowing, you regain. You're in control again.
Correct.
Well, I can tell you medically, right? Basically, what's happening is you're overwiring the body's central nervous system because the brain, sends essentially an electric charge down the nerves. It's a little more complicated than that, but by applying electricity to the central nervous system, you're essentially locking all of the muscles in full contraction so that they can't release. That's all that's happening.
You can feel that.
Right. And then as soon as the electricity stops flowing, now your brain can now send signals to the muscles again, and so you immediately can move again.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think that was way too no duh for that segment.
Yeah, no worries. Good one.
Anyways,
well, really, the only thing we've got left is the hearth.
Let's break it down, man.
Which
Let's
is a good one. So this one is actually kind of personal. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this today, and I got this idea for the hearth tonight because I heard about somebody that I used to serve with way back in the day. Hadn't really thought about this person until somebody else brought him up to me today in a message, basically about how a lot of the bullshit that he used to pull finally caught up with him. And it made me think, excuse me, wow. Very professional, Brandon. There's a serious lesson inside of this. And you guys know me, my brain jumped to Dostoevsky. But I wanted to tell you a bit about this person because, and I'm not going to say their name, but you won't get the point without hearing the story. And I should say up front, too, The Hearth is a segment that we do where we talk about cultural issues affecting the West. Last week, we talked about the Lindsay Clancy thing. This week has a purpose, too, and I'll explain all that inside of it. But the point of The Hearth is for Chris and I to discuss things we feel like are cultural rot inside the West, which is the broader point of our Wednesday show, The Outpost, just to get that out of the way. But their name, like I said, I'm not going to tell you. I am going to tell you the story. But at one point in my career, and I'm going to be broad here because I'm not going to put this person on blast by saying as well where we were. And the other part of that is I found out all this stuff today. He's still active duty and now under investigation, right? But I watched this guy become increasingly dependent upon a story about himself that wasn't true, which is honestly more not popular, but more prevalent in the military than you guys probably realize. Okay. And if you watch any of the shit that's gone on with like maybe Marcus Luttrell or the whole who killed Osama bin Laden thing, you know what I mean? Or Tim Kennedy for that matter. That's probably a better example, Tim Kennedy. Yeah. But this story wasn't true. But it won this guy awards. It won him time in front of a lot of people, important people. So like, the brass, the wing level leadership, all this stuff, people that had the Gucci jobs on base that he wanted, which of course it meant it was really easy for him to get things he wanted. And it even helped this guy eventually promote. Him and I were the same pay grade and then we weren't, right? So the story essentially is a few years prior to that, he was randomly selected to go on a deployment. And where we were at is very rare for this unit to deploy, but he gets picked up and goes. Well, when he comes back, this rumor essentially starts that he took credit for something that somebody did from another Air Force squadron that was deployed there with him that person did. And essentially this credit that he was rumored to have taken advantage of, whatever this act was a very honorable act. I'll just put it that way. And in an expeditionary capacity. And I hear this, I automatically don't put too much stock in it because there was a bunch of butthurt people about this guy deploying before he even left. So I just figured that these were rumors, and more butthurt now that he was back, and you can make fun of him to his face or whatever. But a few months later, I learned from a group of senior non-coms that actually this rumor is true and that he was taking credit for something that he didn't do. So I asked, well, like, why isn't he being hammered about it? And the answer I got was that it wasn't affecting good order and discipline, which is an actual measurable thing inside the UCMJ. And that the person at the other base had already gotten their accolades for it. So whatever, basically. And to me, obviously, I'm like, that's bullshit. But what am I going to do? He and I at the time were the same pay grade, has no effect on me or what I'm doing. Nothing I say or think is going to change the outcome of this at all. And eventually, this guy begins using this story to get himself into certain rooms. He gets a different job where he's filling a billet above his pay grade. He wins like a squadron level award. Then he gets like a group level award. And then he gets put up for like a numbered Air Force award. And he wins all these things like in sequence. It to me, right, like life is going on around me. I'm not thinking about this shit. And then even though I know it's bullshit and I see none of our leadership doing anything about it. So I just assumed that this is just like another golden boy building a myth around himself. And if I start being the person bitching about it, then I'm going to be the fucking problem. And then he starts winning, like I said, these awards. And this dude, the dudes he was there with, in his new job, basically start calling him out because some people that he deployed with were like, okay, you've sort of ridden this to the point where you have now won awards and now you've gotten promoted off of some of this bullshit. And I remember a few times when he was confronted, this dude wasn't just lying. You could tell that he believed his own bullshit, basically. He was getting upset at them for bringing it up, making up more bullshit to sort of cover for gaps in the story because it's not true, which is typically what people who lie do. He even threw people in the unit under the bus about this. And this goes on for like a year. And then I PCS and don't ever fucking hear about or see this guy again till today. And I learned today that this guy is a master sergeant now. This is just senior NCO and wherever he's at, but that there is that person whose accolades essentially that he took credit for at our base that he was deployed with back in the day now outranks him and is in his supervisory chain at his new installation. And
that's
because
some
of this,
dude,
bro, listen to this. And because of this dude goes through Homeboy's records because of the time of year, realizes that it's full of nonsense related to something that he did, I guess confronts this guy, and then and now he is under investigation, right? And a UCMJ investigation is opened up is what that means for everybody. And it's just, to me, it's like the Air Force is such a small place. The military is a small place in general. But for it to work out like this, dude, the military gods were like, we're going to get this motherfucker. And like, that's how rare some crazy shit like this happens. But earlier today, I'm helping Demi's grandparents pack up a U-Haul. I read these messages about this and like I put my phone in my pocket. I'm like, yo, that's nuts. And I'm thinking about this as like we're putting boxes on this U-Haul, and like my mind immediately starts drifting towards the Brothers Karamazov, which is the Fyodor Dostoevsky book, specifically a chapter called The Old Buffoon. And in it, Dostoevsky says that above everything else, don't lie to yourself. Obviously, this guy lied a lot to other people so much that it got him promoted. But what he also did was lie to himself. And in doing that, he started to believe his own lie and then told himself that he was this person who did all these things and then started to behave like what he thought this person would behave like. And eventually, obviously you start listening to your own bullshit. If you do that long enough, you're going to lose the ability to distinguish between what is true inside of you versus what is true outside of you. And then you can fabricate fabricate sort of this entire meaning for your life based on something that's not even true. And you could convince yourself that people who barely know you are meaningful relationships, and these people that think, what I'm referring to is people who think they know you. You can build an entire identity around this thing. And you see this, I think, a lot, and here's where this like Western tie-in is, right, with like virtue signaling, because you can also attach yourself to a political or social cause because it allows you to see yourself as righteous. And this guy saw himself as like a badass, essentially, right? Maybe some righteousness in there. But even though you've never seriously like examined whether or not the thing you're defending is actually righteous or whatever it is you're doing is actually good. And then eventually you're no longer defending this cause anymore. You are defending the lie you told yourself about what it makes you, because now it becomes part of your identity. And when somebody says something that's anathema to it, they're attacking you as a person and not the actual thing you thought you were defending. And that's, to me, where the Dostoevsky thing, that the buffoon point about offense becomes like taking offense becomes really important. Because once your identity depends upon a lie, anybody that asks you about it is not just confronting you, they're a danger to your literal identity. And that's what happened with this guy. If someone criticizes you and you don't hear criticism, you just hear an attack about who you are. So you can exaggerate what they said, which is exactly what all these virtue signaling assholes online do. You assign a different motive to them so you can other them into another group. And you become angry, you become, resentful, so much that resentment feels good because it gives you an explanation that doesn't require you to examine yourself. And if you can, if I can make you the bad guy in this, then I never have to ask whether or not I was the good guy, because in my mind, I've decided that I was. And to take that even further, the rot inside Western culture, I think more and more Westerners have become unwilling to tell themselves the truth about themselves, and that we've essentially inherited a civilization built around responsibility and sacrifice and duty, which all obviously ties into the military for obvious reasons. All these things we talked about with Ballon last night, this idea that, we should become more worthy of the things that we claim to value, to become the person formed by these things, not the person forming something, right, to mimic. But increasingly, we have replaced virtue with performance, and people have built this idea and persona around this like fake virtue signaling thing, or assigning meaning and goodness to things that are hollow or are actually destructive, about like, abortion is healthcare or whatever else, to like dismiss the fact that it's being used for birth control. And you can normalize, like the normalize this culture would be another way for that. But to me, I think that this is these guys, and someone like him is an example of this, of building an entirely different set of morals and ethics outside of what morals and ethics are already established, and trying to use this thing you made up as an anchor point for you, whatever it is called good. But you can't even define good to begin with. You can't define truth to begin with. And so you start to actually reject the actual definition of reality or what is moral and good at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many directions to go with this. Your mind went to Dostoevsky. My mind went back to the Bible. If pride is the original sin of Satan, coveting would probably be second, because he wanted the throne of God, and then third would be lying, right? Because Satan did the exact same thing that you're talking about, where he told himself a lie eventually for so long that he believed it. And that was, I am going to ascend onto the throne and I will make myself like the Most High. And it can't be understated how powerful it is, like you were just saying, and how paradigm destroying it can be. Because if it can manipulate the mind of a creature that literally spent an immeasurable amount of time in the very throne room of God himself and saw the magnitude and the holiness of God himself, and still was able to convince himself that I'm going to ascend to that throne and I will sit on his throne and I will wield his power. Then if it can corrupt the mind of a being like that, well, like the scripture says that we were made less than the angels, right? So we don't have a prayer when it comes to that. And one place that I think that you see this quite a bit is in the community that fights so fiercely for abortion, right?
That's how those Lindsay Clancy fucking
that it's perfectly on display right there. And you watch the mind twist, and there is a large amount of sunk cost fallacy that builds into it, because you get so far down the road that if you admit that any of the counter argument is true, then everything that you are becomes unraveled and everything that you believe in is destroyed. So you have to maintain the lie and continue in it, because the other direction is unthinkable. Like I can't undo all this. And so you'll see a lot of these women, especially the ones that have conducted abortion, they have to maintain the lie that it's for women's rights or it's for my body, my choice, that it is not an actual human, right? That it's just a clump of cells or whatever other lies they tell themselves to dehumanize a human being, to dehumanize a child, to take away any evidence that would support that it was murder, that you just ended a human life. None of that can be true, and it all has to stay twisted, right? Because if one of those threads unravel, then the whole thing unravels, and then you have to look in the mirror and come to grips with the fact that you're a murderer, right? Or at least complicit in a murder, if you want to say the doctor did it, right? But 100%. And it's not just there, like that's just the first kind of example that my mind went to, but you see this all over Western society for sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very old concept. Like, have you read Viktor Frankl's book, The Man's Search for Meaning?
I have not.
Yeah. It's short. It's a really good one. You could probably do it in an afternoon, but there is almost an inverse to all of this in there. Frankl sort of defines meaning, not just like as a story, right, that you invent about yourself because you need something to believe in, right? So you tell yourself, this is my purpose. That's what it is. But that essentially, it's not that you tell yourself that, it's that you have something to discover, and that exists, the meaning exists essentially in your responsibility towards your own life and towards another person and toward finding work that you consider to be worth doing. And then even too, like how you respond to suffering, and especially suffering you can't get out of, not like self-induced suffering, right? Like, I mean, like things that are going on in your life that you have no control over that absolutely suck. And that essentially meaning is what you pull out of from the outside of yourself. You see this in Christianity as well, right? You finding meaning in acts towards others. And I think that's where this gets kind of like uncomfortable when you think about it. Like for me personally, right? Like sort of the meaning that you assign to yourself. If like for most of my, and I'm not trying to be self-aggrandizing here, I'm just relating to you guys. For most of my life, I've been kind of rewarded for being competent, I guess. Military life, people thought I was smart. Leadership would give me more fucking work. You know, I know the answer. I see the problem. I have a plan for the problem. I'm useful. Essentially, when something goes wrong, people want to pick my brain for some of these things. Those are good qualities. But they can also become a very sophisticated place for me to hide, because I can start, and this is, I don't like talking about myself, especially shit like this, because I'm talking about like how I view myself and like my own personal worth. But I can start believing essentially that my competence is the only reason why people think that I matter. And dudes do this a lot. They sort of have this thought process that what I am only valued basically by what I provide. And I think that there is truth in that, but also that you have to, for yourself, see yourself as more than what you're just doing, essentially. You know what I mean? And how people assign worth to you basically based on your capabilities. And I'm not necessarily talking about your family. I'm talking about other people, right? But you know, to know if I am enough, essentially, if I can solve enough problems, or if I can make an argument better than somebody else's, then I have essentially proven, and this is my view, right? Then I have essentially proven that I deserve to be there. And that, once I build myself around that, it's hard for me to find much happiness anyway. And so to me, it's like that's the lie I have to tell myself, or that I see in myself, is that like my worth is just essentially tied to like my competence and other people, right? And what they think about me, basically. And that's why I don't think in like the brothers Karamazov, like Dostoevsky is essentially just like making this claim about like honesty. He's asking essentially whether or not the person you believe yourself to be could survive the truth of who you actually are, and for you, Chris, right? Like, you've spent your adult life serving in the Army. You've accomplished something that not a lot of people have by becoming a Green Beret, Special Forces medic. You are also considered a capable guy, a competent guy. Like, and I would ask you, like, how much of who you are, right, is actually the person that you think you are, like Chris, like the actual person you know yourself to be, and how much of like of Chris is making absolutely certain that nobody could ever see you as weak or incapable. And if tomorrow all of that usefulness that you have went away, how would you know that you still matter without that capability?
I'm trying to find a conversation that I had with somebody that I won't name in text over here. Because essentially it's really weird. It's almost like you were privy to this, but that was the exact same conversation that I was having with them, and that this has been my entire adult life, and I'm doing something different now, and I am in the process of trying to find out if I even am the man that I think that I am, or that I thought that I was.
Right.
Like, legitimately, that's how I typed it out. I'm like, I don't even know if I am who I thought I was this whole time now. And I'm in the process of kind of not deconstructing, that's not the right word for it, and not finding new purpose, or whatever the buzzwords that they say for veterans, right? When you got to find a new mission, find a new purpose, find a new tribe. Not even like really that stuff necessarily, but just like really examine myself. And I've been doing this a lot lately when I get to spend time alone, and re-examining my core values, my belief structure, my personality, even things as simple as like, do I really enjoy this activity or that food or these flavors, or were those things that I learned to put up with because of the military? If given another choice, would I like something else better? Like, how much about me is manufactured, trained in, or just a product of, this is getting off topic a little bit, but just a product of necessity versus like the genuine me
versus presence.
Yeah, down in here. So it's really interesting that you ask me that so directly, because it's something that I'm going through like right now. Yeah, for sure. And it's something that God is really helping me with. Like, I've made a very conscious choice that came out of the realization that a lot of the things that I think that I should have been doing for my family, talking about confronting uncomfortable truths, right? And not lying to yourself. And I've lied to myself a lot in my life. And I'm trying to go back and now hold myself accountable. For instance, there are things that I feel like I should have been doing to better lead my family. I should have been reading the Bible and praying with my wife a lot more. But I told myself, because I was up and gone from the house before the sun came up for PT and back home afterwards that, well, they need to learn how to be strong and get along without me. And I made a lot of excuses for myself like that. The house has to operate when I'm not there. Well, my wife comes home and wants me to engage with the children and make sure that I'm being a proper disciplinarian. And I say proper very specifically because, I'm not just talking about, oh, it's my job to spank the kids because I'm dad. And I'm talking about, developing actual plans tailor-made for each one of the kids based on their personality that is going to help build them into a proper man in society, a Christian man in society, and recognizing that what works on one doesn't work on the other. So I need to tailor this discipline model for each of them, and then be consistent with it, right? When she would ask me to engage in things like that, I gave myself quite a lot of excuses why I didn't have the time to do that. Or again, the house has to function when I'm not here. Times where I should have been more involved in my church and volunteered more of my time. But I always said, well, because I can be deployed at any time, the church has to be able to function without me. So I really can't be spending my time here because I don't want to be a single point of failure is a thing that I told myself a lot. Right. And so it's like I'm confronting a lot of these choices that I've made over the years and am learning that I was indeed lying to myself, and there were places that I should have done better, and now I'm making a conscious effort to do better in those areas. And it's a slow climb. I'm not saying I got out and then the coin flipped and all of a sudden I'm awesome, but giving up drinking once and for all was part of that for me, where I decided, that I'm going to leave that behind with the Army. And leave, and when I turn this next chapter, that's not going to be a thing that follows forward, right? So it's just a lot of stuff like that, man. And I know that's a very long-winded answer to your question, but it's heartfelt, and I'm being genuine with you in answering that. So it's very interesting that you posed it to me like that, because the timing of your question could not have been more relevant.
Yeah. No, it's interesting, man, to know that you were already having that conversation. But no, I don't think that was a long-winded answer. It's exactly the point, I just thought today, reading that about him, like, my immediate impression was, or immediate feeling was like a little bit of vindication. But then I just kind of realized, like, man, that's like kind of fucking shallow to feel that way. Like, it doesn't even, first off, it didn't even affect me really. Like, did it give me some happiness to hear that he was finally getting probably some justice for some of these things? Like, yeah, I think so. Absolutely. But at the end of the day, the thing I started thinking about the most is like, this dude had so much arrogance about something that he didn't do, that he was literally telling himself he was this person.
Yeah.
And he wasn't. And he behaved that way so much he couldn't be told otherwise. It's not like when you confront somebody about a lie and then their guilt overtakes them and they admit it, or maybe it just shows up on their face and you could tell they're lying. Like, this person firmly believed he was this persona. And it just started making me think about like all these other examples I could think of like self-deception. And I was like, well, there's some very obvious ones, especially in like virtue signaling. And then in the chat, Coleswalker brought up like Graham Plattner being an example of some of these things. It's like, yeah, that's another really good example.
Right.
He's somebody that fits that billet that we were just talking about. But I think that you would find that a lot of the things like you were talking about almost, in more of a, like a personal exploration thing of like who you are outside of the military, that if you start challenging some of your own beliefs, you'll realize that, a lot of them, even ones you've never thought about before and that may be really old, are kind of not necessarily like they're lies to yourself, but you're deceiving yourself because of maybe a survival mechanism, or maybe something that you did because you had to fit in someplace, and you realized that like this taste you developed for something, or this interest you had, wasn't actually an interest of yours at all. It's funny that even like now talking about it makes you think of when I was in Germany. There was a couple of dudes that I work with that like were legitimately involved in, or like interested in Formula One racing, and that it kind of became a fad with some of the airmen for a couple of weeks. Like they were all like talking about like Formula One stats and all this other shit.
Yeah.
And then it eventually just completely melted away. Like this goes deeper than just like a fad, but these guys, like they downloaded the Formula One app and they paid $70 a year for it so they could watch the race, and they're going to talk about it. And I really care about all these statistics and these cars and these teams and all this other stuff. And it's just like, it's all BS. Like none of it was actually maintained. And I think that's the point too, is that eventually, whether it's after 3 weeks and you realize you don't actually care about Max Verstappen, that or years afterwards, you realize something from the military developed inside of you, a taste or an opinion or a belief about yourself, that eventually things that don't fit inside of you are going to fall out, and you're going to realize it one way or another. And I think that's an important lesson on trying to be honest with yourself your whole life, because you're going to realize like, man, I was doing these things for so long. I missed out on, what I actually enjoy or what I actually think, even what you actually think, which is kind of wild. And to think about like your thoughts that you're having in your brain belong to somebody else, but it's a very freeing thing to realize that you don't actually believe or do believe something, and that maybe it was manufactured or curated for you by one experience or some person. But there's just like this whole model of self-deception that I think that we've kind of fallen into as a culture and community here in the United States. Yeah. And that a lot of that centers around politics and virtue signaling. But I was like, this is a really good example, and it randomly just kind of fell into my lap. So,
no, that's really good. Your story kind of reminded me. I went through a similar experience on my second deployment, and there was an individual in that unit, and he was a leader in that unit, and he had an opportunity to go out on mission with one of the teams, maybe multiples, I can't remember, but at one point we all reconsolidated. Back, we went from being pushed into country to moved out of country, and then doing like over the horizon stuff for a little bit, and then eventually pushed back in. It was that time frame where the Joint Chiefs were moving units in and out of Syria. Remember, in order to fudge the numbers of deployed personnel,
correct,
keep them from the president. Yeah, I got caught up in all that essentially. So it was while we were pulled back, and this individual was going around and like intentionally, it seemed to me, telling a lot of different members of the unit about this terrible experience that he had while on mission with one of the teams, and the dead kids that he saw, and how it was just messing him up. And he was originally in the infantry and hadn't seen anything like this before, and it was just crazy. And later on, when we all kind of reconsolidated, it spread through the unit very quickly that he was just lying, and that never happened from the lips of the people that were on the team that he was with on that mission. Were like, he told you what? No, that didn't happen. That's not even close to. Not only did it not happen, it's not even close to what happened. And it's just like, it's all made up, but he kept propagating it for some reason that I never was able to understand. Like, it didn't make sense to me. First of all, like, you never shit where you eat, obviously. And so it's like, if you are going to tell lies about something that happened to you on a deployment, are you going to tell lies? We're a very, very small company. We were 7 teams, of each team made up of 4 people. It's a very small company to be a leader in. It's like, you don't think that we're not all going to talk? You don't think we don't see each other on a daily basis, or aren't going to see each other after this deployment? So why you would try to spread these lies inside of this unit was asinine to me. But yeah, no, as you were telling your story, it kind of reminded me of that story. And I'm just like, and it did, it was one of those things that in a very short period of time, like almost took on a life of its own and then became like part of his deployment saga that it defined it for him, you know? And I don't know if he was trying to like gain sympathy or some type of like clout maybe, right? But it never did make sense to me.
It just further proves the point that the truth will come out, whether it's because you are doing something dumb or you've been deceiving yourself or believing something for such a long period of time. But anything else I have to say really is just kind of beating the dead horse. But
I'm all done too.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys sticking with us for 3 hours, especially through the very long grip that I did. That means a lot to me. But anyway, tomorrow's episode is with a very cool guy who is an anthropologist and operates inside of a very niche sect of anthropology called ethnosignology. His name is David Ian Howe. You can go find him on Instagram or YouTube, ethnosignology. But essentially, his wing of anthropology studies the relationship between man and humans and dogs, and how the use of the dog as a technology allowed for the advancement of humankind to get to the point where we are today. Super interesting conversation. Awesome guy, lives out in Wyoming. His page is full of really neat stuff, man. And if you're a dog lover, or even just like very general interest in history, and then like mythology as well. We talk a lot about some of the different cultures around the world, and just basically like how they believe dogs came to be. Like how we all have this sort of belief that dogs seem almost human sometimes, and that some cultures have a an explanation for that goes beyond just like general love that somebody might have for their animal. But super cool conversation. That podcast will come out tomorrow morning with David Ian Howe. Go give him a follow. Check out the show. I'll put his website in there as well. He's about to go do a thing in Yellowstone, the part in Montana, where wolves tend to congregate during the winter time. He's going to go do that and document that entire thing with another guy who studies wolves. And he's going to put all that on YouTube, which I think is pretty cool to check out. So check out that episode tomorrow. Stand by. Obviously, if you follow us over on social media for more videos, more clips from episodes, stuff from the Live Fire. If you're not following the Live Fire Dispatches page over on Instagram, please go give that one a follow too. We do cross posts from the Watchfire podcast page, but definitely appreciate you guys giving those a follow over there. It's free. It doesn't cost you any money. I'll let Chris take us out, and we hope you guys have a good night, and thank you so much for watching the show.
Hell yeah. Last minute Rumble rant comes from JD Atkinson. Says, thank you guys for all you have done and all you do now. You guys inspire me to be better.
Thanks, man.
Thank you. Actually, thank you very, very much. It means a lot. All right. Hope you guys had fun tonight. We will see you next Wednesday for part 2 of Balin. And then, of course, tomorrow morning, like Brandon just briefed you in on. So go with God, everybody. Don't be a dick.
Have a good night.